Chapter 955. The Chinese director's eyes lit up. She couldn't wait to get the cameraman to start the shoot. This was the male lead in her heart. How could someone be so perfect? Even with the mask, it couldn't hide the superstar aura he exuded. When the Chinese director had first seen the youngster, she had felt that he looked too clean and pure. Perhaps, he wouldn't be able to bring out the mysterious effect. Unexpectedly, as compared to the previous set of clothes, the black trench coat and mask were more suitable for him. The moment Bojiu came out, she was stared at by the two girls. Usually, she had a strong tolerance, but today, she was being stared at for a long time. She paused for a moment before asking, "May I ask, what kind of advertisement are we shooting?" "Ah." The stage supervisor snapped back to her senses and was about to speak. Qin Mo pushed the door open and walked out, silencing the entire set once more. Some people, regardless of what they wore, would be able to bring out their unique aura. Noble, indifferent, porcelain white skin. This was everyone's first impression of Qin Mo. At this moment, Qin Mo was wearing a white shirt, holding a can of beer in his hand. His collar was half open. He had wet his hair for the styling. Black strands of hair scattered across his forehead, water droplets sliding down the bridge of his nose. He looked casual and sexy. So handsome. Someone sucked in a sharp breath. Bojiu turned, looking at the person. She was met with a pair of deep eyes. The moment Qin Mo saw her, the color of his eyes deepened. They were separated by half the studio, one in the light and the other in the dark. Bojiu was still wearing the mask. In that instant, her heart skipped a beat. It was because she suddenly remembered something. The Almighty had seen her at Fifth Avenue. Even though it had just been a brush. But back then, she had been wearing a black trench coat with a hood and a black mask. Other than the color of her hair, she had looked exactly the same as now. Bojiu wasn't sure if the Almighty would remember the time they had brushed shoulders when he saw her in this state. For some reason, she felt a little guilty. She tilted her head and prayed in her heart, "Don't remember, don't remember." Just as she was thinking about this, a person appeared in front of her. That person enveloped her on the spot. It could be said that she bumped into that person's arms. When the tip of his nose touched the white shirt, he let out a long sigh. Just like this, it didn't seem like he didn't recognize him at all. "You don't even know how to walk?" A melodious voice sounded from above. Bojiu glanced up and touched the bridge of her nose. Qin Mo studied the youngster's face, especially when his gaze swept over her masked face. His voice was faint, a little nonchalant. "In the past, when I went to America to play, I bumped into someone who looked like you." Bojiu's left hand, which was in her pocket, paused. When she smiled, her eyes were sincere. "I'm so handsome, how can there be someone like me? I really want to meet him. Z." When she heard the codename, Bojiu tilted her head. Through the mask, she asked, "What?" "The person I bumped into in America was Z." Qin Mo's side profile remained emotionless. Bojiu paused, widening her eyes. With the mask on, she looked extremely innocent. "Brother Mo, you mean that I look like Z?" Qin Mo's thin lips lifted. He paused and leaned forward, whispering into her ear, "It's a pity that you aren't an actor." Bojiu's heart sank, but the corners of her eyes lifted. She looked mischievous. "It's indeed a waste of my good looks if I don't act. In such a public event. There would definitely be many people looking over." Bojiu could hear the commotion around her, but it probably wouldn't affect the Almighty much. But for the sake of Feng Yi, she had to remind the Almighty, "Brother Mo, this is a filming studio." She meant for him to restrain himself. Otherwise, Manager Feng would have to go out to drink and explain. It would be rather pitiful. With that, Qin Mo pinched Bojiu's chin. He didn't kiss her, but that position wasn't any different from a kiss. "It seems like we have to talk again tonight." Because of Qin Mo's domineering action. The Chinese director was inspired again. His eyes were as bright as the headlights of a car. Bojio had no choice but to push him away. Brother Mo, there's someone else. At this moment, Manager Feng was almost in tears. Little Spade, it wasn't a waste for me to dote on you. When young Master Qin was showing off his love, you even helped me hold him back. Come, come, come. Feng Yi pulled Bojio's arm decisively, moving her to the side. When he did this, he braced himself to do it. It was mainly because of the coldness emanating from Qin Mo's eyes. His presence was too strong. He really didn't know how Little Spade could withstand such a strong aura. At the end of the day, Little Spade was thick-skinned. The Chinese director was in the best mood. I suddenly have a good idea. Hurry, set up the scene at the side. Yi Sihua, who had been neglected, was now as dark as the clouds in the sky. After all, he was a popular movie star. What was wrong with this director? Did he really think that a gamer would be more popular than him? Yi Sihua had to admit that things would be different with young Master Qin's participation. Hence, even if it was a commercial, it would be a commercial for him and young Master Qin. That useless Fu family would only bring down his standards. Besides, even if he could play the piano, he wouldn't be presentable. Filming a commercial wasn't easy. It was about not being stiff, being able to look at the camera and having some acting skills. Did that useless thing? We are in a rush to finish the film. Everyone, hurry up, the Chinese director said as he glanced at Yi Sihua, who was still seated in the corner. Yi Sihua wasn't stupid, he knew it wouldn't be good for either of them if it dragged on. He stood up and spoke to his manager. The manager nodded and walked towards Feng Yi. Coincidentally, the Chinese director was there too. The manager's attitude was different now. He smiled and said, if we knew that young Master Qin would be appearing in the commercial, our Sihua would have agreed long ago. It seems like it's fate. Director Li, when can we start filming? Even though the Chinese director had just returned from overseas, he was still in the same industry. One look at his manager was enough to tell what kind of person he was. She picked up the script she had written for the scene, her tone calm. Change your clothes and read the script. Yi Sihua watched from the side. Didn't this little director know that the industry was small? With such an attitude, didn't he know that the industry was small? The manager knew that Yi Sihua wasn't in a good mood. When she walked back, she whispered something in Yi Sihua's ear, reminding him to restrain himself with young Master Qin around. Of course I know, don't worry. Yi Sihua licked his lips, his eyes dimming. I'll deal with this director in the future. As for the person who gave up gaming and insisted on filming a commercial, I'll let him know the difference between us. The manager was still worried. He came with young Master Qin, I won't do anything on the surface. Yi Sihua laughed sinisterly. Don't forget, this commercial has a storyline and there are 3 main characters. Since he is so desperate to prove himself, I'll let him know that it isn't easy to be a main character. The manager's eyes widened. You mean to suppress the scene? Suppressing the scene was a term used in the industry. In the beginning, when experienced actors with good acting skills wanted to teach some fresh meat a lesson, they would occasionally use this trick. After all, there were some who didn't even fulfill their role as an actor. They didn't memorize their lines and went around taking part in variety shows, dragging down the production. In the end, some of the more scheming celebrities used suppressing the scene to plot against each other. Especially when 2 people with similar reputations were together. In order to enhance their image, they would use suppressing the scene. But the manager hadn't expected Yi Sihua to use such a tactic on someone who had never acted before. Why? You don't like it? Yi Sihua glanced at him, his words going straight to the point. Don't forget, there are 3 people in this commercial. The best way to make everyone think I'm the spokesperson is to stand out. The manager nodded in agreement, giving him a thumbs up. On the other side, Bojio was already seated in the makeup room, her lids lowered as she flipped through the script she had written on the spot. At the same time, she was trying to think of a way to escape the conversation with the Almighty. The makeup artist was having a hard time with her. Her eyelashes were black and long, there wasn't a need for makeup. She could use some eyeliner to enhance the depth of her features. That would be more in line with the character in the script. But as for the rest, the makeup artist caressed her smooth and fair face, praising sincerely. Your skin is so good, you don't need to put on foundation. If too many things were applied to this face, it would ruin its original handsomeness. Now that he had brought out a spy, he really looked like the main character of a Korean drama. The Chinese director was getting impatient, asking Bojio, "Have you found the feeling?" When Bojio received the script, she didn't know what to say. It was about a hacker. She didn't need to find the feeling. The Chinese director noticed the youngster's silence, assuming that he was nervous because he hadn't been in this industry before. Hence, he softened his tone. Don't worry, just act naturally. Even if you can't find the feeling, your face is more than enough. Come, stand back a little. The Chinese director walked to the side, making space for everyone. He raised the loudspeaker, his eyes bright as he shouted, "Everyone, get ready. First scene, action." Swoosh. The lights in the studio were all dimmed. It was the layout of a billiard hall. The light that shone down was a little dim. However, the slender figure standing beside the billiard table wasn't dim at all. That wasn't all. When the light shone down, it seemed as though he was tall and slender. He stood there casually with a laptop in front of him. He seemed to be a little bored. He hooked his index finger, opened the can, and for some reason, the corner of his mouth curled up. The girls were going crazy as they watched from the side. I finally understand why everyone says that young Master Chin is the prettiest in Jiang City. He's so handsome. I'm so envious of young Master Chin's future girlfriend. She can look at his face every day. And his figure, young Master Chin is a walking clothes rack. I can't take it anymore, my nose is going to bleed. The girls said that because just as Chin Mo was about to raise his head to take a sip of the ice-cold beer, his eyes seemed to have seen something. He turned towards the door. The camera panned in that direction as well. A young man in a black trench coat walked in from the door. He was probably in the middle of a run. As he was a little thin, he wore a black mask, which made his eyes look very black and bright. His entire person seemed to have been drawn with a line pen. The black and white were distinct, and in an instant, he caught the entire camera. At this moment, Yi Sihua was there too. He was also one of them, playing with a black tablet in his hands. His eyes were fixed on the youngster who was walking over. He had wanted to portray an indifferent person, but to add to his acting, Yi Sihua stood in front of Bojio, his voice cold and aloof. I heard your skills aren't bad, want to play a game? It was a last-minute change of script, but since the scene wasn't too bad, the Chinese director didn't ask for a pause. The moment she had seen Bojio, she had probably forgotten that he wasn't an actor and had only wanted to continue filming. Bojio was still wearing the black mask, her hands stuffed into the pockets of her trench coat. She didn't even glance at Yi Sihua, replying through the mask, I'm not interested. The Chinese director felt that the youngster's performance was perfect. The youngster's performance was more in line with the character she wanted to portray, bringing the character to life. Yi Sihua would never have expected the trash to perform so well in front of the camera. Initially, he had wanted to use his impromptu acting skills to silence the youngster. It would be best if there were more NGs. But now, because of the youngster's reply, the camera swept past him, focusing on the youngster. Anyone who knew how to act would know that Yi Sihua was the one who was being suppressed, and it was a harsh suppression. But Bojio couldn't be blamed. She hadn't been interested in this person. Besides, he had changed his script at the last minute. Everything Bojio did was a natural reaction. After all, she knew that the person she was facing was the Almighty, who was standing at the side of the billiards hall. In the camera, the youngster had already passed Yi Sihua, placing the thin laptop on the table and starting to type. Bojio's typing speed had always been fast. Chapter 956. How could there be someone who could move so quickly? Also, the innate sense of being in the camera. Every single detail shocked everyone in the photography team. It was just an advertisement, but it made them want to continue watching. It wasn't just because of the storyline, but also because of the strange tension between the youngster and young Master Qin. The Chinese director didn't forget his mission in the midst of his shock, shifting the camera to the youngster's notebook. There was a huge close-up, especially the bright silver logo, which matched the youngster's hair color. The shot took 3 seconds. The next second, the scene changed. Someone reached out to support the youngster's side across the billiard table. His slender figure lowered, his nose bridge high, his lips thin and his eyes dark. He looked like a flirt. But he didn't even glance at the back of the beauties around him. Instead, he stared at the youngster, his sexy lips lifting into a faint smile. That person wasn't anyone else, it was Qin Mo. Bojio glanced up, their gazes meeting. In that instant, the cover of the notebook was extremely clear. The tension between the two of them became even more obvious. Even though there was hostility in their eyes, when their faces came close, there was an extra hint of ambiguity that made it hard for people to look away. Were they really not a couple? This was the thought in everyone's mind. Some were impressed by the director for coming up with such a scene. This advertisement would definitely be popular. Just based on this scene, no one would ignore the notebook between the two of them. Yi Siwa had an extra second of footage, but his gaze wasn't on him. Instead, after Qin Mo spoke, everyone's gaze was focused on him. "Who are you?" That was Qin Mo's line. It was a short 3 words, but because of his actions and the way he looked at the youngster's thin lips, it was extremely alluring. Bojio stood up, walking past the billiard table and picking up a cue stick. When the youngster was doing this, she lifted her trench coat and removed it with one hand. Then she picked up the cue stick and lowered her body, aiming it at the colored ball on the table. A loud swoosh. The colored ball bypassed the half-opened silver notebook and landed in the middle of the net. Just the sound alone was enough to tell that it was a beautiful shot. At this moment, there was an uproar in the studio. Worried that it would affect the filming, everyone covered their mouths as they turned towards her. He was too handsome. The Chinese director felt a little dizzy from the shock again. He quickly moved the camera to capture the scene. When the youth was playing, his shirt was pulled up, revealing a fair jade-like skin. That curve was astonishingly beautiful. Qin Mo's gaze seemed to have stopped there as well. It was dark and deep to the extreme. The youngster retracted her cue and picked up her coat from the billiard table. She casually draped it over her shoulder and smiled devilishly. "Why should I tell you?" What followed was the young man's carefree back view. Qin Mo stood there, looking at the back view like a devil. He pressed his fingers on the notebook and closed it gently. His thin lips curved slightly and he laughed playfully. "Heh." Finally, the screen stopped at the notebook. Apart from the notebook's logo, there was only a line of words, unfinished, to be continued, Kacha. It signaled the end of the shoot. The Chinese director was the first to stand up and clap. The others couldn't hold it in any longer. Previously, they had been afraid to disturb the two of them, but now, everyone stood up and let out a heartfelt exclamation. After all, even a professional actor wouldn't be able to complete the shoot in one take. More importantly, filming this commercial didn't just require the other party to type fast. The scene just now was also a test of their skills. The photography team had originally wanted to use these things for post-production. Who would have expected that Spade Z didn't just do it? He was so handsome that he could turn the commercial into a movie. This wasn't something that could be done easily. The atmosphere in the studio was unprecedentedly intense. When Bojio walked back, the crew were all looking at her like a fangirl. As for Yi Siwa's whereabouts, no one cared anymore. His face was completely sunken. He wanted to flare up, but he didn't dare. He could only suppress his anger. He didn't want to watch the commercial anymore. He didn't even need to watch it to know that the scene just now had been a deliberate attempt by that useless person to humiliate him. Yi Siwa's popularity had been suppressed. Of course, he wasn't in a good mood. He threw his jacket aside and left with his manager. When he left, his mood wasn't quite right. Of course, the staff in the studio could see it. But so what? Anyone who saw the scene just now would know that Lee Si-hwa was up to no good. A professional actor was bullying someone who had never acted before. In the end, he had been suppressed. It was an awkward slap to his face. Lee Si-hwa was still hoping that someone in the studio would ask him to stay. After he walked out, he asked his manager, "Did anyone follow me?" His manager shook his head in embarrassment. Lee Si-hwa raised his leg and kicked the bin beside him. "What is that?" His manager hurriedly consoled him. "It's just a commercial and the director is a newcomer. Even if young Master Chin is around, it won't have much commercial value. You are one of the candidates that Director William admires, this is nothing." After hearing his consolation, Lee Si-hwa's anger subsided a little. "Go and find out where the director is from. He's so disrespectful, he might as well stop filming." "I know what you mean, I'll ask him now." As the agent spoke, she turned on her cell phone and dialed a familiar number. "Reporter Lee? Listen to what you're saying, I don't have anything to reveal to you. However, there's someone I want to ask about, for this shoot." After hearing the manager's words, the person on the other end of the line replied faintly. The manager's expression changed completely. Lee Si-hwa couldn't hear the conversation and could only look at his face. He frowned impatiently. What did he say? Where did the director come from? The agent's hand that was holding the phone slowly lowered as he muttered, "Director William." Lee Si-hwa replied, "I'm asking you where the director came from, why are you mentioning Director William?" The manager's face was pale, he glanced up at Lee Si-hwa. "She followed Director William back to China, she is his only disciple." Instantly, Lee Si-hwa's expression changed, even his lips stiffened. He wanted to go back but there was no way for him to do so. After all, he had left in a fit of anger, it would only embarrass him if he went back. But how did the director become Director William's disciple? Lee Si-hwa was about to go crazy, anger and embarrassment surging through him. The manager was afraid he would do something else, hence, he pulled him into the nanny van. The manager knew that this wasn't just a commercial they had lost, they were afraid of losing even more. The atmosphere in the studio remained the same. No one noticed that in an inconspicuous corner, a foreigner had been watching for a long time. A foreigner had been sitting there watching for a long time. Beside him was an assistant. Ever since the cameras had started, he had been sitting there, his gaze following Bojio's every movement. At this moment, he only had one thought in his mind. Even if this person had a bad reputation, the young hacker in his movie had to be played by him. Did you see the expression on the youngster's face when he was typing and playing the ball? He is the person we are looking for. Old William couldn't be blamed for his agitation, he had seen many profiles but none of them were as stunning as the youngster every time they met. He fits the role perfectly, be it in terms of looks or personality, he is perfect. He has to be the one, he has to be the one. When old William reached the end of his sentence, he could not help but stand up. Bojio had already changed her clothes and was walking out of the studio. Chin Mo didn't leave because he had something to discuss. Bojio wanted to buy some medicine. As long as she took the medicine within 24 hours, she would be fine. When she left, Bojio took the black mask from the filming crew. She wore it and was about to cross the traffic light. Wait a minute. The person who spoke wasn't very fluent in Chinese, because the two words that came out of his mouth carried a unique accent of a foreigner. Bojio turned towards the direction of the voice. The person who stopped her was a middle-aged foreigner. He was dressed in a traditional Chinese tunic suit, which made him look elegant. For a foreigner, to be elegant, this person's experience would not be very low. "I saw your advertisement just now. Are you interested in acting in the movie?" Old William asked directly. He didn't care what stupid conditions the youngster had to come up with in order to become famous. As long as he could maintain the state he had been in during the advertisement, he would agree. After all, perfection in the movie was the most important. However, he hadn't expected the youngster to reply. The youth only gave him 2 words, "No." His tone was calm and emotionless. The youngster seemed to be in a hurry as he walked towards the opposite direction. Old William stilled for a moment before blurting out, "I don't think you know who I am. You should have heard of Hollywood." The youngster paused, arching a brow. "I don't care who you are, I'm not interested in acting in the movie." Old William hadn't expected such an answer. Hadn't he always wanted to be famous? Acting in a movie will bring you more attention than playing esports. Old William felt that it wasn't logical. "That's not what I meant. I meant that you are a natural actor. Are you sure you don't want to try?" "I don't want to." Bo Jiao wanted to buy some medicine. Once the Almighty was done, she might not have the chance to buy it. Old William stilled once more. This was the first time he wanted someone to act in his movie, but she wasn't interested at all. "But you acted well just now. Why don't you want to act?" Bo Jiao watched as the foreigner followed her. She didn't care anymore and crossed the traffic light. No reason. The assistant next to him was a little surprised to see this. Over the years, no one had ever rejected the olive branch that Director William had extended to them. He was a director who created stars. As long as the main character acted in his movie, even if they weren't popular before, they would be known quickly and become a superstar. Everyone had to admit that he was a world-class director. The movies he produced were equally shocking. Many Chinese celebrities wished they could be the lucky ones when they heard that Director William was going to cast them. But this youngster, the assistant walked over and whispered something to her. Bo Jiao arched a brow. The assistant smiled. "You have to introduce yourself before you start the discussion. Director William really thinks that you fit the image of an actor in his mind. Do you want to reconsider?" "No," Bo Jiao replied without hesitation. She had the cheekiness of a youngster. "I have something to do. Since you are an international celebrity, you shouldn't keep following me. You might get photographed." The assistant had thought that everything would be resolved if she mentioned Director William's name. But from the looks of it, the youngster didn't seem to have any intention of acting. The assistant turned to look at his boss. "The information we received wasn't accurate. If the youngster really wants to be famous, he wouldn't have rejected such a good opportunity." Director William was aware of this, but he could see the youngster's attitude. He wasn't moved at all. He started to panic. Think about it, who would be able to invite this youngster? Isn't he filming a commercial today? The assistant took a moment before replying, "We have to contact Movie Queen," and Director William replied, "Hurry up, it would be best if we can have a meal together." After all, no one had expected to be rejected. If the media were to find out, it would definitely be a hot topic. William didn't care as long as he could invite the youngster into his movie. In the studio, Qin Mo was done with his discussion. He glanced over and asked the assistant, "Where's young Master Jiao?" The agent took a long time before realizing that young Master Jiao was referring to Big Spade. At such a close distance, he blushed slightly. Big Spade asked me about the nearby pharmacy. He must have gone out to buy some medicine." "Buy medicine?" Qin Mo furrowed his brows. The assistant replied, "Yes, he must have gone out to buy flu medicine. It's easy to catch a cold in this weather." "Where's the pharmacy?" Qin Mo had always been cold and polite to strangers. But even so, the girl was still a little incoherent because she had such a long conversation with Almighty Qin. She said, "It's right across the studio, just past the traffic light. It's very easy to recognize." Chapter 957. Bo Jiao wasn't familiar with birth control pills, but she knew it was better to keep a low profile when buying such pills. There weren't many people in the pharmacy, just a few scattered around. Fortunately, they were all elderly aunties. If it was an ordinary young lady and someone recognized her, the situation would definitely be bad. She didn't mind, but manager Feng would probably go crazy. It was better not to have news of esports players buying birth control pills. Bo Jiao wore a mask. She looked around but couldn't find what she was looking for. The medicine probably couldn't be placed on the counter, hence, she couldn't find it on the medicine rack. It seemed like she would have to ask the pharmacist. Bojo sighed inwardly as she walked towards the counter. "Hi, get me a box of birth control pills." The doctor standing at the counter glanced up at Bojo. "Which brand do you want?" There was a brand? For the first time, Bojo felt she wasn't cultured enough. She chose a conservative answer. "I'll take whichever brand has the best effect." However, it was this answer that made the shopping guide shake his head and murmur, "Young people nowadays are really..." Bojo wasn't young in her heart, but she hadn't come into contact with such things in her previous life. If it wasn't for the lack of time, she would have wanted to bring the Almighty's child back to the Fifth Avenue. But now... Bojo clenched her fists. This was the only way. A total of 25. Cash or Alipay? The pharmacist glanced over, scanning the barcode. Bojo felt that it wasn't a good time to use her phone. She reached into her pockets but didn't bring any cash. In the end, she inhaled deeply and used her phone. "Is WeChat okay?" "Yes." The pharmacist's expression didn't change. Bojo whipped out her phone. The moment she unlocked the screen, she received a message. It was from the Almighty with only 2 words. "Where are you?" Bojo glanced at the image of the cartoon. She hesitated for a moment but didn't reply. Instead, she opened the payment function. The pharmacist scanned the barcode and passed the medicine to her. Bojo lowered her gaze, her silver hair covering her face as she took the medicine. Suddenly, a deep and familiar voice rang out from above her head. "Shouldn't you explain what you're doing?" Bojo's back stiffened. She only had one hope in her heart, that the Almighty was like her, lacking knowledge in certain areas. The hand that was holding the medicine paused for a moment. Then Bojo quickly stuffed the medicine into her pocket. Even her gaming speed wasn't as fast as it was now. After she was done, Bojo glanced over, meeting Chin Mo's icy gaze behind her. She had never seen an Almighty like this. His deep eyes were extremely deep. Before she could say anything, Chin Mo had already reached out and pulled out the wrist that the youngster had stuffed into his pocket. His voice was as indifferent as the storm before the storm. "What is this?" Bojo opened her mouth, her throat moving. "Medicine." "What medicine?" Chin Mo's handsome face didn't show any emotion, but the cold aura he exuded could freeze the surroundings. Bojo didn't reply because she didn't know how to explain. Chin Mo glanced at the 2 words "Yuding." He wanted to crush the person in front of him and swallow her into his stomach. That way, she would know who exactly she belonged to. That way, she wouldn't have come to buy this medicine. If that was the case, she wouldn't be thinking of leaving even now. Chin Mo lowered his body, taking the medicine from Bojo's hands. Bojo watched as the medicine slowly deformed in his hands. It seemed as though he wanted to destroy it. But the Almighty's emotions didn't change. Because of this, Bojo knew that he was really angry. Chin Mo lowered his lids, clutching the box of medicine in his palms. With a voice that he had never used before, he said, "I asked you to wait at the same spot but you never waited. Just like at night, when I sleep, would think about what that arrogant little Jo is doing. I want to wake up earlier so that I can see her earlier. It's the first time I want to kiss someone but I can't do it. You probably don't understand this feeling at all. That's why you bought this medicine here." Bojo wanted to say something. But the Almighty seemed to be listening to her explanation. "Do you think I'm illiterate or that I don't recognize this brand? Since you don't want to be together, let's break up." After saying that, the Almighty only gave her a distant view of his back. Bojo had seen that back view way too many times before she had gotten close to the Almighty. But there had never been a time like this, when she couldn't breathe. She wasn't sure when it started to rain. When Bojo walked out, the Almighty was nowhere to be seen. He must have been picked up by the Chin family's car. Bojo clenched her fists, her gaze sinking. She stood in the rain, her hair slightly damp. Her back was still straight, but it had never been as listless as it was today. She was like a little tiger that had been caught in the rain and didn't know how to warm herself up. Perhaps because the person who could warm her up had left, she didn't care about the water splashing on her. That was how Feng Yi saw her when he rushed over. From what he could remember, the devilish youngster had never been like this. Had they quarreled? That was Feng Yi's first reaction. Where was Boss Qin? He glanced left and right, unable to find him. Feng Yi was almost certain that they had quarreled. He reached out to press down on his brows. His head started to hurt. If even little Spade was like this, he could almost imagine young Master Qin being in a bad mood and how low his aura would be for the entire day. He guessed that the managers of the various departments would be having a tough time. But how did they end up in such a state? With young Master Qin's personality, even if he was angry, he would have taken little Spade away to teach her a lesson. Why did he leave her here? Feng Yi frowned, bringing Bojiu into the car. It wasn't good to be drenched like this. He tried to communicate with the youngster. Weren't you fine just now? How did you end up like this after buying some medicine? Bojiu glanced out of the window, the rainwater trailing down the ends of her silver hair. She didn't care, her handsome face tilted to the side, hiding her expression. Her mind was still ringing with that sentence. Since you don't want to be together, let's break up. Breaking up was only a matter of time. She had no choice but to reject it. She had overestimated her tolerance. Just a few words could affect her to such an extent. If she waited until the Almighty found out about her identity, he would frown and look at her in disgust. She probably wouldn't be able to take it. Bojiu reached out to press her fringe down. When her phone rang, her voice was slightly hoarse. Hello. It was a call from the school. Bojiu's boarding application had been approved and the school had asked her to bring her luggage over. Even if she still had to participate in the competition, she still had to follow the school's basic procedures. In reality, Bojiu wasn't in the mood to think about what the other party had said. But she could do something to distract her. If she stayed in the school, it wouldn't be too abrupt when she left. Bojiu had been stalling for time. She understood all too well that no one would feel good when someone suddenly disappeared. But if everyone knew that the person beside them was an international criminal, He Honghua would probably be frightened. She didn't want to see that. This time, she had used her identity to return, which meant that some people were already aware of her return. Among them, there would be people who wanted her dead. If they found out about her identity, He Honghua would be in danger. Hence, she had to leave. Just like back then, even if she didn't want to leave her puppy without saying goodbye, she still had to leave. Bojiu still remembered that night, after she had climbed onto the balcony, she had used a lot of strength to enter his room. In order to prevent her from attacking him at night, he had always placed some flowers and plants on the balcony. At that time, she hadn't cared about those things. After sneaking into the room, she had looked at him sleeping on the bed and leaned over to kiss his face. She thought that she might as well carry him away. She was strong anyway. But Bojiu knew that her puppy wouldn't leave with her. He had his own things to do and his own family. It would be boring to watch her typing every day. And he would meet with danger. Just as her father had said, it wasn't suitable for the young lord of the hacker world to have friends around her. It was still raining outside. Droplets of rain fell on the car window. The Land Rover was very good at preventing rain, especially for military use. It was almost impossible to hear the sound of rain outside. But even so, the driver sitting in the driver's seat didn't dare to say anything at this time. Ever since his young master had entered the car, he had been sitting at the back without saying a word. Rainy days had always been his young master's taboo. Usually, his young master wouldn't go out at this time. This time, it was probably because young Master Joe was following him. Even though the weather wasn't good, his young master didn't seem to be uncomfortable. But now, where was young Master Joe? The driver didn't dare to ask this question because his young master's expression was unprecedentedly cold. Qin Mo didn't feel anything. From the start till the end, his left hand hadn't loosened. There was a box of medicine in his left hand. The box of medicine had been squeezed to a certain extent. Chin Mo's fingers were still the same as before, not softening in the slightest. If it wasn't for this box of medicine. Perhaps he could have told himself. He was different in that fellow's heart. Even though that fellow had many secrets. In front of him, she would treat him sincerely and wouldn't reject being with him. But now that he thought about it, he was the one who said they wanted to be together. It could be said that he had forced her. In her heart, perhaps he wasn't that different. But he was wrong to think that she treated him the same way he treated her. That feeling was as though he had taken a step forward confidently but didn't notice the steps in front of him. He missed his step and fell down with his head bleeding. The pain was unbearable. Chin Mo loosened his left hand and glanced at the car window. After the car reached the military courtyard, he remained in the same position. Movie Queen had just finished shopping with He Honghua. She had wanted to sit with Jiu for a chat, but when she opened the car door, only her son was left. What was this? Movie Queen arched a brow and looked at her son's face. Chin Mo alighted from the car, not caring if there were any raindrops on him. He said faintly, "I'm tired, I'll head upstairs first." The intelligent Movie Queen quickly realized that there was a problem. She wanted to head upstairs to ask him but felt that as a parent, she shouldn't interfere with her child's relationship. After entering the room, Chin Mo acted as though nothing had happened. He unbuttoned his shirt and threw his clothes to the side before entering the bathroom. He allowed the water to splash on his head, as though he was trying to clear his head. Indeed, he was much more clear-headed. At the very least, he knew that person's true thoughts. In hindsight, what was so good about that person? She had never been willing to listen to him, much less take him seriously. When had he, Chin Mo, been so lowly? Chin Mo chuckled. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. The coldness in his body didn't seem to be dissipating. Instead, it became thicker after he came out of the bathroom. He sat there, looking at his open laptop. His neck tilted back. Enough. It was indeed enough. But even though he said that, after Chin Mo came down from the stairs, Movie Queen noticed something different about her son. For example, he kept looking at his phone. He seemed to be waiting for someone's message. But when he saw the screen, his eyes dimmed again. When he finally received a message, it was from his secretary. "I'm going to the office." Chin Mo stood up. This was the first time he didn't want to have nothing to do. Time trickled by. Bo Jiu was the last student to board the plane at number 1 middle school. The dormitory manager's expression wasn't any better. But she didn't make things difficult for him. The news of Bo Jiu moving into the male dormitory spread through the entire number 1 middle school in an instant. Of course, it attracted many onlookers. Everyone in the dormitory would stop and glance at Bo Jiu. After all, the school hunk staying in the dormitory wasn't something they could be happy about. Moreover, he was an esports star. How many girls would be attracted to him? They didn't have any hope in the future. But there were some who were optimistic. With Bo Jiu here, things would be easier. For example, a photo of the school hunk for 5 yuan. No one knew that Bo Jiu had chosen to move in today because she didn't want to be alone. Besides, we are all hunks and should know the most basic etiquette. It's fine to take off your shirt since the weather is hot, but walking around in just your underwear is an eyesore. If you have a good figure, it might be worth looking at. If you don't, are you showing your bottom line? The boy, who was only wearing a pair of underwear, inexplicably felt like he had been shot. However, since everyone was handsome, everyone in the dormitory agreed. Most importantly, there might be girls coming to visit in the future. Bo Jiu stood at the window, glancing down at the girls who were pacing back and forth. She didn't doubt their offensive abilities. Some of them will take pictures. You guys probably don't want to be caught in the most embarrassing scene. It isn't good to find a girlfriend like this. The moment Bo Jiu finished her sentence, the boy in his underwear leaped into his bed. The boys who didn't care about their appearance changed their clothes and looked at themselves in the mirror. As the roommates of the school hunk, their looks had to be up to par. In the past, no girls had come to visit them. In the future, they would definitely be asked out by girls. From now on, they would have to take care of themselves. At first, the atmosphere was still all right. Suddenly, someone said, "Young Master Joe is here. Will young Master Chin come to visit in the future? Will my favorite Almighty Lin Feng come too?" Bo Jio didn't listen to what the person said. The two words, young Master Chin, seemed to have pierced a certain nerve. It wasn't painful, but the moment she thought about it, she became much quieter. Think about it, the entire Supreme Alliance team will come to our dorm. Young Master Chin's arrival will definitely attract a huge crowd. The person was completely immersed in his own imagination. Bo Jio glanced up, her voice calm. He won't come. Ah. The people in the dorm were confused. Why did young Master Jio look like he had fallen out of love? No, they couldn't make wild guesses. In the past, they had thought that young Master Jio was definitely gay like the rumors said. But now, which gay was that strong? The rumors couldn't be trusted. But why did young Master Jio come to stay in the dorm? It was a mystery. Do you have a cigarette? Suddenly, the young man spoke again, interrupting his roommate's thoughts. Give me one. He even smoked? This didn't match their image of the top student in school. Second brother, watch the corridor. Howl when the hostel manager comes. The moment the thornhead spoke, even the boy in underwear cooperated. Their efficiency was high. It was obvious that they had done such things often. Smoking had always been a group activity. It was normal for everyone to have a cigarette in the high school dorm. But it was hard for them to accept the fact that the school hunk smoked. Bo Jio didn't look at their shocked gazes. She tilted her head and lit the cigarette. She stood by the window, not wanting to move. Hey, don't you think the school hunk is a little listless? He looks completely different from when he beat me up. He's probably thinking about the competition. Didn't you see his cooperation with young Master Chin? It was amazing. Bo Jio turned at the mention of young Master Chin. Didn't I mention that I'm not in a good mood? You gave the entire dorm a show of strength the moment you entered. It was obvious you weren't in a good mood. But why? Do you want to know the reason? Bo Jio flicked the cigarette ash, her gaze deepening. The 5 roommates looked at the youngster, nodding in unison. Bo Jio glanced up, her voice cold. I was dumped by young Master Chin. Everyone. Didn't he say he wasn't gay? It was finally quiet. No one mentioned young Master Chin's name again. Bo Jio extinguished the cigarette and glanced at her phone screen. She hesitated for a long time but didn't send the message. Her roommates didn't dare to talk about her situation since young Master Jio's martial arts skills were too strong. But young Master Jio was probably the only one who could be so handsome after falling out of love. Bo Jio's mood didn't change even after 2 consecutive cigarettes. She leaned against the wall. Even if she wasn't handsome, she was still listless. The atmosphere in the room was heavy. Her roommates felt that since their new boss was here, they had to celebrate. Do you want to go out for a meal? The big plate chicken at the school entrance is a must-have. Bo Jio glanced at them. Indeed, she wanted to go out for a walk. Staying here like this made her feel stifled. Let's go. Bo Jio extinguished the cigarette and walked out. There was a new scenery in number 1 middle school today. The other 5 walked in front. The youngster stuffed her hands into her pockets and followed behind. She wore a black mask and lowered her head to look at her phone. The girls passing by felt their hearts go out of control. Ever since Bo Jio joined the competition, she hadn't been to school much. Now that she was living in the dormitory, it became a benefit for the girls. The legendary big plate chicken was just opposite the school. It was just a road away. Since it wasn't summer break yet, the weather wasn't particularly hot. Setting up a stall outside the shop and enjoying the natural breeze while eating was a form of enjoyment for the male high school students. Beer was a must. Since she didn't have any lessons today, she was just living in the school. Thorny took a bottle of beer. Just as he was about to pour half a glass for Bojo, the youngster took a bottle over. She bit down on it, opened the cap and gulped it down. The 5 roommates were stunned once more. They watched as the youngster drank without a change in expression. Their school hunk was indeed a ruthless character. They probably noticed that Bojo was looking at her phone. Someone couldn't help but ask, "Young Master Joe, what are you looking at? Why are you so engrossed?" "Nothing." Bojo closed the WeChat page and took another sip of beer. That person didn't think there was anything interesting on the phone. He couldn't understand why young Master Joe was looking at an empty WeChat screen. This meal. Bojo didn't eat much. She just sat there and drank silently. Because it was by the side of the road, anyone who drove would be able to see it as long as they opened the windows. When she opened the 4th bottle of beer, Bojo paused. Bojo paused for a moment. It wasn't because of anything else, but because of the familiar military Land Rover that was driving over. The car plate was unique and there was only one in the entire Jiang city. Bojo recognized the car and so did her roommates. One of them blurted out, "Isn't that young Master Qin's car?" Only then did he realize something and shut his mouth. It was indeed a car Qin Mo often took. The windows weren't closed. They could clearly see that handsome and aloof face. The driver noticed them and paused for a moment. "Young Master, it's young Master Joe." Qin Mo glanced over at Bojo and said calmly, "Let's go." The driver was puzzled. Usually, young Master would ask young Master Joe to get in the car. But today, the roommates who were eating chicken were still thinking about young Master Qin's gaze. He must have looked over, but the next second, the Land Rover drove away. He turned back to look at the youngster's expression. Bojo didn't say anything. She retracted her gaze and ordered another bottle of beer. The roommates were dumbfounded. If they continued drinking, the lovelorn person would be fine, but all of them would collapse. Honestly, the school hunk was a little scary when he was lovelorn. On the other side, the Land Rover was still driving forward. It wasn't going fast. Firstly, the driver was still in shock. Secondly, his young master's gaze was on the rearview mirror. He didn't urge him to drive faster. Instead, he seemed to be waiting for someone. Qin Mo was indeed waiting for someone. He glanced at the rearview mirror, hoping to see the youngster chasing after him. But he didn't. He had glanced at his phone countless times today. He had told himself that as long as that person sent him a message, regardless of what was important to her, he would try not to be too domineering. Once again, reality hit him. That person didn't care about him at all. Feelings were similar to multiplication. As long as one side was 0, the result would be 0. Qin Mo tilted his head, his gaze lowered. The driver wasn't sure what his young master was thinking. He kept staring at the rearview mirror until they left the road. Then, his gaze changed. However, it became even more lifeless. It was as though he had returned to the time when he had known young Master Joe. He wasn't interested in anything. His emotions were indifferent. His gaze was indifferent too. This kind of young master was really worrying. The scenery outside the car window retreated. Time trickled by. Bojo didn't continue drinking. She took out her wallet to settle the bill. She glanced at her roommate who was still vomiting in the corner. She stood there and lit another cigarette. She had never smoked so much before. Even when she was on her period, she would only smoke half a cigarette to relieve the pain. But it didn't seem right not to smoke. Perhaps she had never expected that person to treat her like an ordinary person, brushing past her with such an indifferent expression. Her heart tightened. This should be the lightest punishment. When the Almighty found out about her true identity, would he be 100 times colder? No one could predict it. She should do something else to stop herself from thinking about it. That way, it wouldn't be so boring. It would be more natural for them to meet again in the National League. Bojo knew that she wasn't being fair. But the Almighty might not know that he liked her in her high school facade. In reality, the real her wasn't that innocent. Underneath this facade, she was an international criminal. He had said that he would capture Z personally and send her to jail. Bojo didn't regret taking this path. But sometimes, she would think that it would be great if that person could accompany her on this path. But Bojo knew that they were destined to walk different paths. Their methods were different. The Almighty followed the law. And she used her own methods. If it was possible, she hoped that in his heart, she would be the person he wanted to separate from and not a criminal. Chin Group Club. Numerous laptops were switched on at the same time. A meeting was being held in the meeting room. Anyone with eyes could see that Boss Chin's pressure was lower than any other day. It was probably too low. He wasn't even paying attention during the meeting. But to them, it wasn't that bad. Other than the slight fear, everything else was fine. The moment the words, "meeting ended," were heard, the managers fled the scene hurriedly. Feng Yi had wanted to talk to him about Little Spade, but from the looks of it, anyone who mentioned that name wouldn't have a good ending. Chapter 959. Qin Mo still remembered when he received this lighter. He couldn't wait to hold it in his hand and play with it several times. He couldn't get enough of it and liked it no matter how much he looked at it. He didn't want anyone else to touch it except him. So he always carried it with him. Qin Mo knew very well that the girl didn't know what day it was. From her wandering eyes, it could be seen that she had forgotten everything, and her guilty conscience could be seen. The next day, she gave him such a thing. It was because the girl was the one who gave him the lighter that he couldn't bear to part with it. But at the end of the day, he had used some tricks to get this gift from her. Qin Mo's fingers tightened, and his eyes deepened. Captain. Coco had just finished a live broadcast and was still wearing his uniform. He wanted to take advantage of the break to come in to rest and seek comfort from his captain. As the person who carried the external publicity of the entire team, Coco would sometimes appear in the company. But he hadn't seen Manager Feng today, so he didn't know how Qin Mo was feeling today. After hearing the sound, Qin Mo glanced sideways. Coco sat on the sofa, his tiger teeth exposed. He reached out and tugged at his shirt. Captain, next time when you answer questions in the live broadcast, you and Little Spade should go. 80% of the people are asking me if you are really together. I said you are brothers, but they didn't believe me. I'm not good at lying, so I almost exposed you. Coco spoke for a while. Seeing that his captain didn't even look at him, he hopped over, holding a bag of yogurt in his mouth and looking at Qin Mo. The captain didn't even look at him. He was holding something in his hand. Coco looked for a while. He really didn't understand what was so good about this little thing. Why would the captain look at it for so long? After drinking the yogurt, Coco threw the bag away and asked curiously, "Captain, what is this?" Coco's question seemed to finally pull Qin Mo's eyes back. Lighter. Qin Mo's voice was very calm, as if the thing in his hand was nothing special. Coco widened his eyes. This is a lighter? This shape? It looks good. Where did you buy it? Qin Mo remained silent. But even so, Coco didn't notice that his captain was in a bad mood. He continued to look at the pure silver lighter. The more he looked, the more he liked it. Let me try lighting a cigarette. Why are you lighting a cigarette? Qin Mo arched a brow and threw the cigarette lighter to the side. Such an ugly thing. Ugly? Coco looked at his captain's side profile. There was no emotion on it. The naive Coco thought that his captain simply didn't like the igniter. Captain, if you think it's ugly, give it to me. I think it looks good. When Qin Mo heard that, he lifted his eyes and glanced at Coco. Her gaze was so cold that Coco's scalp went numb. He thought he had said something wrong, and his left hand felt like it was frozen. What did the captain mean? He had already said that it was ugly. Doesn't that mean I don't like it? Why was she looking at him as if she wanted to chop off his hand in the next second? Just when Coco thought that the captain would say something to him, Coco's eyes widened. A cold and indifferent voice rang out again, "Up to you." Up to you? Did the captain mean that he could take the lighter away? But that wasn't what the captain's gaze said. Coco confirmed again. Can I really take it away? Didn't I say up to you? Chin Mo sat on the sheepskin office chair. His slender and fair fingers flipped open the contract beside him. He had a handsome face, but there wasn't a trace of warmth in his voice. Instead, it was cold for no reason. Coco saw that his captain's expression was really unfriendly. He could only shut his mouth and tentatively reached out to touch the electronic lighter. Seeing that there wasn't any reaction, he gathered his courage and put it in his pocket. He turned to leave. Chin Mo, who was sitting on the office chair, paused for a moment. When he came back to his senses, the words came out of his mouth. Put it back. Coco turned back to look at his captain. His gaze was a little shocked. After all, his captain had never gone back on his words. After Chin Mo met Coco's gaze, his voice became faint. You can choose another one. Didn't you always like the mouse I used before? When Coco heard this, his focus immediately shifted. He put the lighter on the table and said excitedly, Captain means that I can take that mouse. Chin Mo said, holding the lighter in his hand again. Of course, Coco saw this scene. He was very puzzled. What did the captain think of this lighter? If he said it wasn't important, why did he treasure it so much? One had to know that the captain's mouse was a limited edition. Whether it was the feel or the appearance, it was first class. In the past, he wouldn't even let him touch it. Now, in order to keep the lighter, he directly abandoned the mouse. If he said it was important, just now, the captain seemed to want to throw it away. What was going on? Before Coco could figure it out, he was picked up by Feng Yi, who came to arrange work. Along the way, Coco told everything he saw to their manager. He wanted Feng Yi to help him analyze what was going on. After listening, Manager Feng frowned even more. It seemed that he still had to have a good talk with those two people. In the CEO's office, without Coco, everything seemed unusually quiet. Chin Mo glanced at the lighter in his palm and slid open the phone screen. There was still no message in the WeChat dialog box. When Feng Yi pushed the door and walked in, this was the scene he saw. Since you want to contact him, why don't you call Little Spade directly? Hearing this, Chin Mo looked up at him, even his voice was cold. Is the company very free today? How could it be, very busy? As a manager, Feng Yi still dared to say some things. If you continue like this, how are you going to play in the competition? Besides, Little Spade usually listens to you. Is there a misunderstanding? Chin Mo didn't say anything. Feng Yi continued, in a relationship, there are some things that have to be said clearly. It's useless for you to sit here like this. Chin Mo sat back and pulled off his tie, full of abstinence. The door is behind you. That meant that he could go. Feng Yi shut his mouth but felt that it was necessary to clarify. What exactly are you angry about? This was a question without an answer. The man in front of him was still looking at the contract in his hands, cold and without a trace of space. Feng Yi knew that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of him even if he continued asking. He glanced at the lighter that Coco had mentioned. It was obviously too important, hence, even though he was angry, he didn't throw it away. It should be from Little Spade. It seemed like he had to put in more effort to find out the reason. As the manager of the club, he didn't just have to guard against his players dating outsiders, he also had to guard against them dating insiders. You don't have to worry about my condition. Feng Yi waited for Chin Mo to speak, but he didn't say the reason. Instead, he said faintly, there won't be any problems in the competition. At this point, Feng Yi didn't know what else to say. He could only solve the problem from the side. To solve the problem from the side was to ask the other party. After leaving the office, the first thing Fong Yi did was to call Bojo. The youngster's phone went through but no one picked up. Fong Yi pressed his head, unaware that Bojo had drunk alcohol in the afternoon. Bojo drank around 10 bottles of Budweiser alone. After finishing, she returned to the dormitory and climbed onto the bed. She slept on the upper bunk, which was much quieter than the lower bunk. Classes started on Sunday afternoon. Bojo wasn't in the mood to go to class. She got on the bed, opened the quilt, and covered her head with it. She listened to the sound of rain outside. The scene on the street was still replaying in her mind. From afar, that person had been sitting in a car. He had seen her but his gaze had been indifferent, as though she was just an ordinary person. Bojo froze, her heart clenched tightly. She couldn't fall asleep at first. But after the alcohol kicked in, drowsiness slowly crept over her. Her chest was still unable to accept the emptiness, as though she had lost something. Fortunately, alcohol was useful, it could help her sleep. Hence, the sleeping Bojo didn't hear her phone vibrating. Her roommates didn't dare to disturb her, but when the phone kept ringing, they guessed that something had happened. Thorny's roommates first looked at the caller ID. The name, Fox Phone, was especially eye-catching. But since it was the school hunk's phone, they didn't dare to touch it. They could only wait for the ringing to subside. The sleeping Bojo was dreaming. Her dreams were filled with scenes from her childhood. When she woke up, there was no one in the dormitory. Everyone had probably gone to class. Bojo lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling in a daze. During this period of time, Bojo had been with Chin Mo ever since that day. The sight of no one in the room when she opened her eyes had become rare. Because every time she woke up, there would be someone by her side. But now, it was obvious that she wouldn't be able to enjoy such treatment anymore. Bojo tilted her head. She was listless, her movements weren't as agile as before. Coincidentally, the headmaster had brought someone from the student council to check on the dormitory. Classes had started but there were still students sleeping in the dormitory. Coincidentally, the school director came to inspect the dormitory with people from the student union. Classes had already started, but there were still students sleeping in the dormitory. One could imagine that no matter who that person was, the headmaster's expression would not be too good. But because it was Bojo, he didn't punish her too harshly. Go to the field and do frog jumps. Go to class after you do 100. The headmaster wasn't bad. He was strict with the students but he treated them well. Bojo respected him even though she hadn't been to school. Moreover, she didn't want to be idle. When she reached the field, she squatted down, placed her hands behind her back and started to jump. Bojo's jump attracted the attention of many students. Look, isn't that the top student? Frog jumps on the first day of school. My Highness Joe is so unlucky to be caught by the devil. But what should we do with Highness Joe's cute and handsome jumping? Some of the students from the normal classes started to discuss openly. The teacher standing on the podium knocked heavily on the blackboard. Pull your attention back. It seemed like she would have to discuss with the headmaster. Even if she wanted to punish someone, she couldn't do it on the field. It was too eye-catching. It was indeed eye-catching. With Bojo's silver hair and face, it was rare to see her jumping with her hands behind her back. It was no wonder people wanted to see it. But as the saying went, enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Number 1 middle school and number 2 middle school were close to each other. Even though the useless number 2 middle school's field wasn't as big as number 1 middle school's field. However, the two fields were also next to each other, separated by a net. It was common for middle year 2 youngsters to be punished. However, the moment he stepped out, he saw Bojo bouncing on the number 1 middle school field. Instantly, he became excited. He didn't even care about the teacher who was hitting him with a book. He ran over and asked Bojo, "Hey, what were you punished for?" Bojo didn't reply. The teenager continued, "Let me tell you, I'm being punished unjustly this time. Do you still remember when I asked you to play for me to confirm my relationship with my girlfriend? I just went to your #1 middle school and gave my girlfriend lunch. I even used the roses planted in the school to prove my innocence. Not only did your director get angry when he saw me, he even punished me." Bo-jio slowed down. She glanced at him and said slowly, "That's a good punishment. I can't stand people like you who show affection everywhere." The #2 middle school youngster, it took time for the frog to jump. The school hunk of #1 middle school and the boss of #2 middle school were punished at the same time. But one of them was clean and handsome from start to finish. The other one was hit on the head by the headmaster. Shui Yao Yao saw the scene too. She placed the pencil in her hand aside, her gaze on the youngster didn't retract. The school had to pass the test in order to successfully participate in the National League. Hence, Bo-jio had always been cooperative. The headmaster was satisfied with the youngster's attitude and didn't call his parents. Bo-jio was also glad that his parents weren't notified. After all, Qin Mo's name was written in her contact list. But after this time, even if he was notified, he probably wouldn't come. Bo-jio sat on the edge of the field. Bo-jio sat at the edge of the field, using the back of her hand to wipe the sweat that was dripping down her sharp chin. The fangirls couldn't control themselves. The teachers probably knew that no one was listening to this class. Everyone's attention was on the field. But Bo-jio's attention was on her phone. She couldn't be too presumptuous in front of the headmaster. She found a secluded place and wanted to call Manager Feng. Chapter 960. The Japanese? The team that Hoshino was in? Alright, I'll be there in a while. Bo-jio stood up. She had just done her frog jumps and her legs weren't as nimble. She knocked on the phone but didn't reply immediately. "Brother Mo, are you there?" Feng Yi glanced over at Qin Mo, who was putting on his uniform. He lowered his voice. "MMH, I'm here." Bo-jio paused, listening to the faint voice from the other end of the phone. "Who are you talking to?" He didn't know why he felt guilty, so he directly hung up the phone. Feng Yi listened to the busy tone, meeting Qin Mo's gaze. His gaze was calm, carrying an indescribable depth. With Boss Qin's intelligence, he must have guessed who was on the other end. But for some reason, he didn't seem to understand. Boss Qin lowered his head and adjusted his sleeves, asking. Feng Yi coughed lightly. "It's Little Spade, the Japanese are here and they have to gather the entire team." Qin Mo didn't say anything else. As a manager who understood his team members' thoughts, Feng Yi added, "Little Spade said she'll be here in a while." Qin Mo stuffed a hand into his pocket, arching a brow. "Oh. She's so scared that she hung up on you. Are you sure she'll be here in a while?" Feng Yi coughed again. This time, it wasn't intentional but he really choked. He lowered his voice. "You've been waiting for her news the entire day. I asked you to contact her but you didn't. Boss Qin, why do you have to do this?" Qin Mo glanced at him. When he spoke again, his voice was hoarse. "I just wanted to know my position in her heart. Now, it's clear." Feng Yi opened his mouth. The words were at the tip of his tongue but he couldn't say them. He had never seen Qin Mo in such a state. Even though he was still standing, when he glanced out of the window, there was a sense of desolation. Feng Yi understood that whoever started the trouble had to end it. He still had to wait for Little Spade. "Let's go." Qin Mo picked up the cigarette lighter on his desk. The collar of his pure black uniform was flipped up, revealing his chiseled and cold handsome face. Feng Yi heaved a long sigh and rubbed his head. On the other side, it wasn't convenient for Bo-jio to apply for leave the moment she finished her frog jumps. Fortunately, Yao Yao was there to testify for her. It was something that happened in the club. Otherwise, with the suspicious gaze of the headmaster, Bo-jio would really have to climb over the wall if she wanted to come out. The two of them took a taxi. They didn't have time to change into their combat uniforms, so they put on their school uniforms. It wasn't far from the school to the club. Bo-jio glanced down at her phone. She knew the problem wasn't with the medicine. In fact, the Almighty had restrained himself every time he wanted her because he was afraid of hurting her. She knew very well what the problem was. However, there were some things that could not be said. Moreover, she was about to leave. Bo Jiao swiped the screen before sliding it back. Shui Yaoyao obviously noticed that the person sitting next to her wasn't in the right state of mind. She called out softly, "Your Highness Jiao." Bo Jiao glanced over. "What is it? Is something the matter?" Shui Yaoyao asked directly. Bo Jiao paused for a moment before smiling. "Nothing much, I made a mistake and am reflecting on it." "Face the wall in front of my phone and reflect?" Shui Yaoyao didn't understand. Bo Jiao glanced at the WeChat page again, thinking about how the person she was going to meet would treat her like a stranger. Her eyes dimmed and her silver hair drooped down. Shui Yaoyao paused. She didn't look like she was fine. But that was probably how Bo Jiao was. When there was no one around, no matter how lazy and dispirited she was, it wouldn't affect her devilish nature. Hence, when she reached the club, she saw a baby-faced person pointing at her. "That's the guy I'm going to PK with." Bo Jiao swept him a glance, her voice nonchalant. "Who are you?" The baby-faced person's eyes widened. "How can you not know who I am? Are you very handsome? Why should I know you?" Bo Jiao walked forward, her gaze sweeping over the baby-faced person's combat uniform. She arched a brow. The baby-faced person noticed her gaze, straightening his body. "You should know now, I just defeated one of your members." "How is it? Do you want to PK with me?" Bo Jiao paused, a hint of a smile on her face. "I'm the first official member of our team to arrive. Is there anything to be proud of when the Japanese's first member defeated our reserve team?" Bo Jiao seemed to be more lethal when she wasn't in a good mood, even her words were sharper than usual. Shui Yaoyao thought, Her Highness Jiao must have spent a lot of time with the Almighty, her venomous tongue must have picked up at least 80% of her skills. The baby-faced person's face flushed red. Unfortunately, he had only fought with reserve team members, he hadn't fought with an official member of Supreme Alliance. With Bo Jiao's words, he felt a suffocation in his chest, unable to take it down. At this moment, a chuckle came from the sky. "Isn't that easy? Let's find an official member to PK and see Supreme Alliance's strength." It was Watanabe. As he spoke, he glanced at Yu Cixin. "Captain, am I right?" Yu Cixin still had his long hair, but there wasn't a hint of femininity. When he glanced at Bo Jiao, his gaze deepened. He yawned lazily. "Watanabe, how many times do you want me to repeat myself? Supreme Alliance is the club's decision, it's just an exchange, not a competition." Watanabe wanted to continue, but Bo Jiao saw his gaze deepen. Bo Jiao watched as the pretty boy's gaze deepened. With a lazy tone, he said, "In China, only the national champion has the right to compete with us." With that, Bo Jiao glanced at the person. Mei Nan smiled at her and walked over. As he brushed past her, he said, "I'm curious. What's your relationship with Hoshino? Why does he pay so much attention to you?" Bo Jiao glanced up, her lips lifting. Yu Cixin waited for the youngster to speak. Just then, a familiar voice came from behind. "You can ask me if you want to know." "Captain, when did you start being so nosy?" Yu Cixin turned towards the person who spoke. He was wearing the same uniform as him, his brows clear but his gaze was filled with warning. Yu Cixin chuckled. "All right, tell me, what do you see in him?" "I admire his gaming skills." Hoshino glanced at Yu Cixin. "I've said that before." Yu Cixin knew that Hoshino was starting to get unhappy. He didn't want to test his limits, so he stuffed his hands into his pockets. "It's just a joke, why are you so serious?" Mr. Yu Cixin might have gone overboard with his joke. Another voice rang out. It was faint, slightly cold, and had a unique feel to it. Bo Jiao didn't turn. She felt a warmth coming from her wrist, with a faint fragrance and a hint of tobacco. The familiar scent surrounded her along with the warmth. The next second, she saw the beautiful curve of his jaw. "My teammate doesn't know your teammate," Chin Mo said, glancing down at her. He glanced down at Bojo. "It's better not to make some jokes, don't you think?" Bojo caught a glimpse of something else in his eyes, but before she could get a clear look, the Almighty shifted his gaze away. At the same time, he also let go of her wrist. His side profile was indeed as she had imagined, indifferent without a trace of warmth. Lin Feng, who didn't know how to read people's expressions, leaped over and said to Bojo, "Little Spade, what's going on with you and Captain? Why is he treating you differently? Is he starting to feel bored and cold towards you? Don't worry, if Captain dares to abandon you, I'll stand by your side even if I have to take the risk of rebelling." Lin Feng's voice was soft, only the two of them could hear him. Bojo remained silent. Lin Feng felt that this matter had to be changed. "Look at me, I'm so responsible. After sleeping with Yunhu, I immediately told the surrounding people to stop having any ideas about me. I'm going to have a family in the future, you have to let Captain know about this so that you can take the initiative." Bojo had mentioned that she hated people who showed off their affection the most. She glanced over, her tone calm. "You're the one who takes the initiative. Your lips are already torn, your words aren't convincing. If you don't have the strength to resist Almighty Yun's kisses, just say it, I won't laugh at you." Lin Feng was dealt a huge blow. He took out his phone and hurriedly looked at his lips. F***ck, it was really torn. Didn't Yunhu know how to restrain himself? How was he going to brag like this? "Don't tell me you're like this in bed." Bojo's final attack successfully petrified Lin Feng. When he regained his senses, Lin Feng watched the youngster's back view, his heart stifled. Why were some people like this when they were in a bad mood? Little Bojo wasn't happy. Ever since she entered, he hadn't even glanced at her. Chin Mo walked in front, his hands in his pockets clenched for a moment before relaxing again. His indifferent gaze met Hoshino's face. They stood in different positions, their gazes intersecting. Feng Yi noticed the change in the situation, speaking with a smile. "Since it's just an exchange and not a competition, let's sit down and have a chat. Our friends from the media have been looking forward to the Japanese's arrival." Yu Cixin stilled, breaking into a smile. "We won't be used to it if there are too many reporters." Feng Yi had expected him to say that, his lips lifting. "Mr. Yu Cixin, don't worry, the Qin group has a media business, it's just an exchange, not a press conference like you are imagining." Yu Cixin narrowed his eyes. He had originally wanted to use the exchange as an excuse to take a closer look at Supreme Alliance's strengths. He hadn't expected them to use this as an excuse. It was no wonder Supreme Alliance was the wealthiest team in the industry. Supreme Alliance's manager was indeed an unscrupulous businessman. Actually, that wasn't the only reason Feng Yi had called the media over. It was because of Qin Mo's abnormal state. The media was there to remind Boss Qin that even if they had a conflict, it couldn't be displayed in front of other teams. Both of them were able to keep their composure. But because of their composure, Feng Yi was worried they would explode. After all, no one had ever been able to guess young Master Qin's thoughts correctly. A meeting between two teams, one of which was the Japanese, would be newsworthy. Even if the entire Japanese team wasn't present, Hoshino and Yu Cixin represented the entire Japanese team. Their captain and vice-captain were world-class esports experts who rarely showed their faces. Every word would become a headline in esports. The doll-faced man couldn't be rash even if he wanted to compete with Bojo. Both teams were good-looking, even if there was enmity between them, it wouldn't be displayed at such a moment. Etiquette was a basic rule of etiquette for both teams. Hence, it was a real exchange. Bojo wasn't interested in conversing. She sat very close to Hoshino and turned to glance at him. Hoshino could guess what she wanted to ask, sending a message over. "I found out about Rao Rong, I'll send you the information when I get back." Bojo replied, "Okay." The receptionist walked over with a tray of fruits and tea. Feng Yi had arranged for this to be a friendly gesture. But the moment the receptionist placed the tray in front of Bojo, Hoshino interrupted. Hoshino suddenly said, "She doesn't eat peaches." In that instant, the receptionist wasn't the only one who froze. Even Lin Feng and the others turned towards Hoshino. How did he know Little Spade didn't eat peaches? They had interacted with Little Spade for so long and yet, he didn't seem to eat peaches. After all, Little Spade wasn't a picky eater. Hoshino seemed familiar with something they didn't know. Even though Lin Feng was naive, he was still sensitive to such matters. Did they know each other? That was his first reaction. On Qin Mo's side, the hand holding the teacup froze. He lifted his eyes and looked at the youngster indifferently. Bojo knew she couldn't let the Almighty see through her. Hence, she reached for a peach slice and placed it in her mouth. In the past, she hadn't been able to eat peaches as they would break out in rashes. But this was different. Bojo lowered her lids, swallowing the peach slice before taking a sip of tea. Hoshino's reaction was quick. He smiled naturally and added, "Watanabe, did you forget how you said it wasn't nutritious the last time you ate peaches?" Watanabe pointed to himself. Was that true? It seemed like there was, so he nodded. Everyone was enlightened. So he was referring to Watanabe. They had assumed Hoshino was referring to Little Spade. It was a beautiful misunderstanding. Qin Mo retracted his gaze. But he didn't release his grip. He knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. There was someone who knew him better than him. Or perhaps. Chapter 961. Qin Mo's gaze turned cold. There was an obvious change in the atmosphere. His pitch-black eyebrows were raised, and his expression was frosty. Sitting beside him was Lin Feng, the one who didn't know how to read people's expressions. He turned towards Hoshino. "I heard from Mr. Hoshino that you admire our Little Spade?" Hoshino didn't avoid the question. Instead, he turned to Bojo and smiled faintly. "Yes." When Hoshino said the word, "yes," Qin Mo's gaze deepened. Lin Feng still wanted to ask something, but he was stunned by the cold aura emanating from his captain. He could only shrink his head back. But even if Lin Feng didn't ask, it didn't mean Hoshino wouldn't continue. He seemed to have something to say to his fans since there were reporters around. "I've watched every single one of Spade Z's matches. Be it in terms of skill or character, he is worthy of a battle with the Japanese. At the same time, I hope Supreme Alliance can win the National League, which is also the reason I came to Supreme Alliance. I want to have a match with him." The Japanese vice-captain thought so highly of him. If this video was broadcasted, to a certain extent, it would definitely reduce the existence of some anti-fans. After all, Hoshino's words were right there. His fans would also treat Spade Z as a decent opponent. Most importantly, it was time for some people to calm down. Even Hoshino recognized Spade Z's ability. Those who had been saying that Bojo had gotten to where she was because of their relationship had to think twice before they spoke, even if they weren't willing to admit it. Japan's influence in the esports industry. The strongest player in Asia had never failed before. Even the video of Hoshino's 1v3 against Xiangnan team was still on the internet. Almost everyone knew that he was a very low-key person. For him to give such an evaluation to Spade Z, most of the rumors would collapse on their own. Sensing the value of the news, the media at the scene immediately started a live broadcast. After all, they didn't expect Hoshino to admire a newcomer so much. For some reason, Feng Yi felt that it was dangerous to continue this topic. He glanced at his boss's side profile and forcefully changed the topic. "Thank you for your kind words, Mr. Hoshino. Supreme Alliance will fight well in the upcoming finals. It seems like Supreme Alliance is confident in themselves." The person who said this was Yu Cixin. When he smiled, he gave off a dangerous vibe like that of a wild leopard. When he said this, he looked at Qin Mo. If Hoshino wanted to play against Spade Z, he wanted to see just how powerful the legendary 3000 knife cutting was. Watching other people's matches, one could only see the surface. If one didn't fight personally, how would one know who was stronger? Facing such a gaze, Qin Mo's handsome face didn't change at all. It seemed as though no matter what Yu Cixin said, it wouldn't affect him. This made Yu Cixin raise his eyebrows. He really wanted to fight with this team that made Hoshino look at them in a different light. On one hand, he wanted to understand why Hoshino was so interested in this team. On the other hand, he knew that Qin Mo's win rate was higher than his in the individual competition records. Qin Mo's name had once been a legend in the esports industry. They had thought that they would be able to compete with this person back then, but they didn't expect Supreme Alliance to not even make it to the national finals. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for the Japanese to win that match. At that time, some of the seniors were still glad that Supreme Alliance didn't participate. But in his eyes, Hoshino was the person he wanted to study the most. As for Qin Mo, he was a suitable opponent. Yu Cixin lifted the edge of his lips. The reporters filmed the scene and pulled the topic back to Hoshino. Almighty Hoshino admires Spade so much, but he doesn't seem to have interacted with Spade before. Hoshino laughed, taking out his phone and showing them the screen. I've followed him, but Spade hasn't replied. I'm still waiting. He really followed him? Why didn't they know? The reporters at the scene felt that their ability to capture news was terrible. Unbeknownst to them, Hoshino had added him before he came to the club. It was to make everything seem logical. Bojo, who was familiar with him, understood his thoughts quickly. Even without any verbal communication, just a glance was enough to know what he was thinking, making everything seem logical. Bojo smiled. I don't usually use the official Weibo account, I'm going to reply now. With that, she took out her phone, her slender and fair fingers unlocking the screen. After logging in, she clicked on the latest follow. It was a simple exchange of fans, but it immediately caused a wave of discussion online. Especially Hoshino's fans. My almighty Hoshino actually follows other teams, that doesn't make sense. Who is this Spade Z? I've never heard of him, is he from our country? I just went to search, he's the FC King of China's Zone C, Supreme Alliance's super rookie. Almighty Hoshino is interested in him? Previous poster, don't go off topic, I think it's a friendly follow. When has Almighty Hoshino ever followed others? I didn't see him like this during the International League. Take a look at the interview online. Almighty Hoshino said he wants to have a good match with Spade Z. He must be strong if he can attract Almighty Hoshino's interest. I've decided to take a look at this Chinese player. Faced with the sudden visit, the fans of Spade official fan club were a little confused, but that didn't stop them from welcoming him in a friendly manner. In an instant, Bojo's negative comments on the internet lessened. After all, Hoshino was the first to follow Bojo. With the addition of the interview, the topic of discussion soared. The media seized on this point, hoping for more interaction between Bojo and Hoshino. Lin Feng, who was sitting beside Qin Mo, felt a chill starting from his neck. Even his scalp felt numb. It wasn't because of anything else, but his captain's grip on the teacup tightened, his eyes losing the last bit of warmth. Lin Feng saw with his own eyes that a layer of frost covered that handsome face in an instant. Qin Mo looked in the direction of the two, his cold and noble side profile expressionless. His gaze was deep and unmoving. Lin Feng could understand his captain's feelings. Hoshino was treating Little Spade too well. But according to Little Spade, wasn't his captain starting to give Little Spade the cold shoulder? Why did he care so much? Lin Feng felt that the relationship between two men was even more complicated than the relationship between a straight man and a woman. He couldn't analyze it, so he just shrunk his neck and acted as the background. This was to prevent the captain from giving him a look when he said something wrong and letting him experience it himself. Fortunately, the interview wasn't long. If not, Lin Feng suspected that the teacup would be crushed by his captain. Yu Cixin was the first to stand up. He stuffed a hand into his pocket and looked at Qin Mo. I hope the next time we meet Supreme Alliance, it will be on an esports competition. By the way, Mr. Qin, have you thought of a way to deal with Xiangnan? Your team doesn't seem to be mature. The competition is about skills, not maturity. Qin Mo's voice was calm. His words stopped Yu Cixin from probing further. He smiled. Just as he was about to turn his head and ask Hoshino to leave, he saw that the tripod was showing signs of loosening. It looked like it was about to fall. Bojio and Hoshino were still standing under the tripod. Qin Mo had obviously noticed it earlier than Yu Cixin because the moment Yu Cixin's pupils constricted, Qin Mo had already moved. What he hadn't expected was that at that moment, the youngster moved as well. The youngster moved as well. Her movements were extremely fast, just like what he had seen countless times. Whether it was her landing or her focus, they were all beautiful, including her reaching out to grab Hoshino's wrist and stepping to the side, using her back to block him. It was reflected in Qin Mo's eyes. At that moment, he remembered the start of the Cold War. He hadn't taken the initiative to look for her ever since. He hadn't taken the initiative to call or send any messages either. When he saw her, he would brush past her. He wouldn't even smile as a passerby. But she definitely didn't know. He was in so much pain. Because in her eyes, there was someone more important. There was a dull thud. Qin Mo's shoulder withstood the pressure. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Even the staff member who was originally in charge of the camera showed a terrified expression. No one had expected the camera to malfunction. Everyone's face was pale. They covered their mouths as they watched the scene unfold. When Bojio heard the noise, she turned over and saw the Almighty standing behind her, blocking the thing for her. He looked into her eyes, his thick brows furrowed slightly from the pain. His aura was burning brightly. His eyes were as clear and deep as the sea, tinged with a faint ink that could drown a person. His handsome face gradually turned pale under the light. The paler his skin was, the harder it was for people to look away from him. It was as though she could see his thoughts through his skin. Bojio suddenly realized something. She let go of Hoshino and stood up, opening her mouth to explain. Qin Mo had already kicked the camera away, heading towards the exit, leaving her with nothing but coldness. This time, Bojio didn't hesitate. She chased after him. Hoshino chuckled, straightening himself and turning to the dumbfounded crowd. I never expected Spade Z to be so skilled in real life. Fortunately, Hoshino was there to smooth things over. Otherwise, Feng Yi wouldn't know how to continue the conversation. The Japanese had met with an accident in their territory. If the news got out, the consequences would be dire. Right now, Feng Yi was thankful for Little Spade's subconscious action. If it had been the other way around and Hoshino had protected Little Spade, Supreme Alliance would have been embroiled in a series of fights between anti-fans. The consequences would have been dire. Yu Cixin's emotions had already changed. He immediately rushed over and pulled Hoshino over. His voice was a little deep. How are you? Are you hurt? I'm fine. Hoshino turned, smiling faintly at Feng Yi. Fortunately, Spade was here, help me thank her. Yu Cixin's gaze dimmed. He glanced at the camera, his expression dark. But that was it. The media reports were basically about an accident during the interview and how Spade Z had protected Hoshino. Feng Yi's situation was much easier to deal with, but he was more worried about young Master Qin's health. Even if he hadn't used much strength, the back of young Master Qin's shoulder should have been red. But that wasn't the main point. The main point was young Master Qin's back view, which seemed to have lost all his warmth. But what Feng Yi didn't expect was that even so, that person still maintained a trace of rationality. No, that wasn't right, it wasn't rationality. It was more like digging 3 feet into the ground to find a person. Because when he received the call, the voice on the other side of the phone was extremely cold. Go check who touched the camera's tripod. I'll go check the video now. Feng Yi knew that this happened because of his incompetence as a manager. But he didn't expect such a problem to happen in the Qin Group Club. After all, no one in Jiang City dared to do such things in front of the Qin family. But Feng Yi wasn't sure if this incident was targeted at the Supreme Alliance or Little Spade. But no matter which one it was targeted at, in young Master Qin's eyes, it was probably a death sentence. Other than Qin Mo, it was obvious that Hoshino and Yu Cixin had realized something. The former was worried that this attack was targeted at Z. She had experienced too many similar incidents and was worried that this attack was targeted at Z. The latter was born in a country, his beast-like instincts made it hard for him not to think of conspiracies. But Yu Cixin knew that such a childish attack wouldn't be targeted at his identity. That position was either to disqualify Hoshino or to disqualify Spade Z. Based on the current situation, the latter was more likely. If Spade Z and Qin Mo hadn't blocked it, Yu Cixin would have suspected Supreme Alliance. But on second thought, if one of them was injured here, Supreme Alliance would suffer the greatest loss. Hence, this attack was definitely targeted at Spade Z. Yu Cixin raised a brow. With the youngster's skills, he could have easily avoided the tripod, but because he was afraid Hoshino would be injured, he used his back to block it. Was this really Spade Z's reaction after analyzing the pros and cons and not his instinct? If it was instinct, Hoshino and this Spade Z. Yu Cixin narrowed his eyes. He didn't know that Hoshino was hiding something from him. Time trickled by. Bo Jiu rushed out and watched as the person hung up the phone. Without turning back, she held on to the railing with one hand and jumped over. But the person was already in the car and didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Bo Jiu rushed over, her long legs blocking the car door. Her eyes were dark and she was about to speak. Chapter 962. Bo Jiu managed to stop him with much difficulty. Of course, she wasn't going to let him leave just like that. Brother Mo, your instinctive reaction wasn't bad, Qin Mo said, his gaze deep and his voice cold. Qin Mo spoke again, his gaze deep and his voice cold. Should I be asking you how you met Hoshino? I don't even know you can't eat peaches. How many things have you been hiding from me? Do you want me to tell you everything? Every time I don't contact you, you don't take the initiative to contact me either. You do what you want to do and aren't affected by anything. I'm different. Every time I'm in a meeting, I'm thinking about what this person is doing. Why isn't she coaxing me? As long as she sends a word, even if it's just a phone call, a lot of things can be changed. In the end, you just don't want to reconcile, right? Bo Jiu's fingers froze. She didn't know how to reply because the Almighty had hit the nail on the head. Qin Mo glanced at her and slowly turned his face. His black hair hung down, blocking his eyes. No one could see his expression. Since you don't want to be close to me, we will separate as you wish. Both of us probably don't like people who cling to us. Clingy, these 4 words. Bo Jiu lost most of her energy. But instead of saying it for Bo Jiu, it was more appropriate to say it was for himself. Sometimes, even with all his sincerity and hard work, it only proved that the other party didn't care. Especially after witnessing the scene just now. Qin Mo reached out to close the car door. After a moment of silence, his voice was cold. Drive. The driver wasn't from the same family. When he started the car, he didn't dare to look behind him. The coldness emanating from Boss Qin seemed to be able to freeze him. Bo Jiu watched as the black Land Rover disappeared into the parking lot. After a long time, she walked out, her steps getting heavier. It was as though she had returned to her younger days. She had wanted to be alone but had been forced to leave with her father. She wanted to bend down because it wouldn't hurt so much. But Bo Jiu knew that to her, she could bend over anything except her waist. The burden she carried wouldn't allow her to do that. Bo Jiu inhaled deeply, leaning against the wall for a while. She wanted to smoke but realized there was only a lollipop in her pocket. It was the one the Almighty had bought for her. Bo Jiu took it out and held it in her hands. She thought she would never forget it. There was a woman who always kept 2 candies in her coat pocket because she liked candy. He was clearly such a cold and noble person who never ate sweets. Bojo reached out and pressed down on her silver fringe. When she opened her eyes again, there was an obvious change in her pupils. He pressed the familiar string of numbers on his phone. Hoshino, who was standing beside Yu Sishin, took a step back. I'm going to relieve myself. Yu Sishin raised his eyebrows and said with an indescribable evil aura, be careful. Hoshino glanced at him. Got it. This person always treated others like porcelain dolls. It was interesting. Crossing the corridor, Hoshino took out the vibrating phone from his pocket and placed it beside his ear. Hello, Z, who knows about your team coming today? Bojo's questions were always direct. Hoshino knew what she was getting at. The reason should be within Supreme Alliance. Our visit was decided by Captain at the last minute and the other members aren't aware of it yet. Hence, the person who tampered with the camera must be someone from here. Other than the cameraman, the only person in charge is the floor supervisor. But from the looks of it, the person must have escaped. After the disguise, it would be hard to leave a trace even with the camera. Bojo was calm. That organization has their eyes on Supreme Alliance. More accurately, they have their eyes on me but they wouldn't know I'm Z. Which means someone is trying to drag me down to deal a heavy blow to Supreme Alliance. I'm sure you have found out what exactly happened to Chin Mo, right from the start. Bojo had wanted to know why her puppy had lost his memory. Now, she wanted to know even more. Her intuition told her that the terrorist organization's main target this time was the Almighty. Hoshino chuckled lightly. Z, you're as sharp as ever. I did find some information regarding Chin Mo and the person who impersonated you. They knew each other and almost became lovers. Hoshino chuckled lightly. Z, you're as sharp as ever. Lovers? Bojo's fingers stilled, her gaze wavering. Hoshino's voice was still ringing in her ears. But for some reason, Chin Mo started to treat this person coldly. It could even be said that he hated her. Bojo lowered her voice. That isn't strange. According to the Almighty, he wouldn't tolerate a criminal who hacked into someone else's computer. It has nothing to do with that. Hoshino paused when he heard the voice. Do you want to hear my analysis? MMH? Hoshino sighed inwardly when he heard the dispirited reply. He broke into a faint smile. Z, it's such a waste of your intelligence. You're really clueless when it comes to relationships. Before she could open her mouth, Hoshino continued. Chin Mo's matter is covered up deeply, even with your identity, the information we can find is limited. That means we are only looking at the surface. What happened to Chin Mo is something only he knows, so the theory of lovers doesn't hold water. The main point is Z, the person who impersonated you this time, her brother was dealt with by you. At that time, someone exposed the hacker's hidden information to some powerful people, using the internet to control people's thoughts, just like the maiden's sacrifice. Even though the method is different, the truth is the same, distorting the truth and causing people to lose their bottom line. An entire school of students to a certain extent become people who can harm others at any time, but they don't know it. Do you still remember what you said at the time? The scariest thing isn't the devil but the human heart. Bojo glanced up, her gaze deepening. So it's him. Hoshino paused. Back then, you and Chin Mo worked together to send her brother to prison. Now that she's back, her target is Chin Mo, revenge. Bojo's handsome face was especially distinct under the sunlight. Her brother killed many people, it seems like she has inherited his legacy. Hoshino glanced out the window. It wasn't just revenge, she was even more vicious than her brother. She wanted Chin Mo. In order to get what she wanted, she destroyed everything around her. Human lives weren't important to her, the dignity and innocence of others were just tools to be used. The maiden's sacrifice had destroyed too many people. Her first target wasn't the young lady you saved but Shui Yaoyao from your team. At that time, she created a small forum to discuss Shui Yaoyao's actions. Back then, she created a small forum to discuss Shui Yaoyao. Her target was always those who were still working hard. You should understand what her brother and she wanted to destroy. They wanted to control the world because that is how human nature is. But back then, she was just testing, a small test that caused Shui Yaoyao to be wronged for a few months. After that, she made her move in Tokyo. When she felt that it was about time, she came to China and started the official maiden sacrifice. This world shouldn't be like this. Some people clench their teeth and live their lives. They can't speak the truth after being oppressed because the moment they speak, people will jump out to oppose them. There are others who commit murder, commit arson, steal other people's hard work, steal other people's works. They will be forgiven. It won't be like this forever, Bojio interrupted. If not, what's the point of our existence? That's right. Hoshino laughed, his eyes bright and his teeth white. It won't be like this forever, so it's time for us to take action. What do you intend to do with Li Shui? She definitely won't admit to her crimes, and those who don't care about plagiarism will try their best to clear her name. Bojio raised her hand, shielding her eyes from the glaring sunlight. When you weren't around, I hired a good lawyer. His surname is Bai and he has never lost a case. If Li Shui doesn't admit to her crimes, we will sue her until she does. Her mother knows that even if she wins the case, the compensation would be minimal. Based on Li Shui's personality, she might not even apologize and the people who scolded her will continue to scold her. But that isn't important. What's important is that the people who care about her know that there is still justice in this world. They protected the most important thing for the person they love. That person can finally rest in peace. It's strange that you hired a lawyer. Hoshino stuffed a hand into his pocket. It seems like Qin Mo has affected you quite a bit. Do you like him? At first, Hoshino assumed that the person on the other end would hesitate, even if it was just for a second. But she didn't. When she spoke, there wasn't a hint of hesitation. Yes, I like him a lot. I want to kidnap him and bring him back to the Fifth Avenue. Fortunately, I'm still rational and didn't carry out the plan. But I don't know if I can control myself in the future. She was so honest that he didn't know how to reply. Hoshino supported his forehead with his long and fair fingers, his lips lifting. In that moment, he didn't know how to reconcile his feelings. The person who had always been a loner finally had someone she liked. But that person wasn't him. Hoshino inhaled deeply. Don't torture us single dogs. But we won't be together. Hoshino didn't know how to reply to her next words. He's from the police and I'm an international criminal. In the movies, princes and princesses are always together. Which prince and evil dragon are together? The prince will only kill the evil dragon, but the Almighty won't kill me. I'm so handsome, he won't want to see me or hide far away from me. It was worse than this. Bojio didn't tell Hoshino her last sentence. Instead, she changed the topic. Do you have a photo of that person? Hoshino knew who she was referring to even without Bojio's explanation. There are only some blurry ones. She is like her brother, never leaving behind any photos. But do you remember the address you gave me previously? It's an internet cafe beside Qin Mo's university. She should be staying nearby. She might even be staying in school. Bojio's eyes twitched. She rented a house outside but doesn't stay there. When she isn't on a mission, she stays in school. Even if she is on a mission, the school's network would be more convenient since the public IP isn't easy to locate. Hoshino caressed his phone. You think she's a student? 90%. Bojio glanced down at the lollipop in her right hand. If she's a student, it would be a useful disguise for her. Besides, the university isn't far from number 1 middle school, making it easier for her to locate her target and help her. More importantly, it's Qin Mo's school. You mentioned that if she wants to get him, the best way would be to become his schoolmate or join Supreme Alliance like I did. There are only 2 females in Supreme Alliance, me and Yao Yao. That eliminates the possibility of her being in Supreme Alliance. The only other possibility left is that she's his schoolmate. Hoshino retracted his gaze from the window. I understand what you mean. I'll focus on the investigation. Someone is coming, take care of yourself. I'm hanging up. Bojo hung up. She glanced at the phone screen. She resisted the urge to call Chin Mo. She continued to use the method to keep herself busy. But this time, while she was busy, Hoshino's words kept flashing through her mind. They had almost become lovers. Which meant that the Almighty knew her. But the Almighty seemed to have forgotten about it. How did that happen? What exactly happened back then? Since Hoshino hadn't been able to find anything, she could only hack into the data of some special forces, and since that person liked to impersonate her so much, she could only use her own methods to prove who was the real one. Now that she knew her target was the Almighty, she couldn't let that person continue to roam free. She had to settle this matter before she left. Even if the Almighty didn't want to talk to her anymore, the sun moved west. The black Land Rover didn't drive back to the Chin family's house. Instead, it stopped at a bar. The bar was near the school. Chin Mo didn't look at his injured back. He sat at the bar counter, tugged his tie, and ordered a row of drinks. The driver had already been sent away. Chin Mo didn't show much emotion even when he was drinking. But his elegant and handsome side profile was clearly much colder. He drank one glass after another, as though that was the only way his back wouldn't hurt so much. He thought that the guy must not have even noticed that he was injured. Because at that moment, she probably only had Hoshino in her eyes. Chin Mo laughed softly. His lips were slightly lifted, but there wasn't a hint of a smile. Instead, there was a sense of decadence and loneliness. Chapter 963. In the darkest corner of the bar, a girl came in after Chin Mo. She sat there and watched Chin Mo for a long time before breaking into a sweet smile. She walked towards Chin Mo with her beautiful eyes. "Senior Chin, I didn't expect to meet you here." Chin Mo shifted his gaze away from the wine glass, sweeping her a glance. He didn't say a word. "You should have forgotten my name. The last time I almost fell down the stairs, you were the one who supported me from behind." The girl tilted her head. She was wearing a skirt and had short hair. Her fingers were slender and looked like a cello player. She smiled at Chin Mo as though she wasn't bothered by his coldness. "I'm Fan Jia, senior brother Chin, remember me this time." Chin Mo remained silent, pushing his glass over, gesturing for the bartender to continue. Fan Jia chuckled lightly. She stood at the side, her eyes bright and teeth white. "Senior Chin, you don't look happy. Do you want to say it? It will make you feel better." In that instant, something surged in Chin Mo's mind. He looked at the girl and found her familiar. She had short hair and the same face shape as that fellow. But her eyes weren't like that fellow's. They were extremely dark and clear like water. He started to think about that fellow again. Little Fujio, who haunted him. That fellow who looked like a multiplication table. Chin Mo furrowed his brows. He was supposed to be impatient, but there was a hint of warmth in his eyes when he thought of someone. "Senior Chin, what's wrong with your back? Are you injured?" Fan Jia reached out. Chin Mo glanced over, his gaze icy. "It doesn't seem to have anything to do with you." Fan Jia blushed but didn't get angry. "I'm just worried about you." When Chin Mo heard this, he stood up, picked up his jacket and made a call. He didn't know who he was calling, but he said faintly, "I drank too much, come and pick me up." Lin Feng was baffled when he picked up the call. After all, he never thought that his captain would call him. It seemed like he really had too much to drink. Lin Feng's heart churned. He had witnessed the entire scene today. The unhappiness between his captain and Little Spade was obvious. Little Spade was really a withered spade. Between being punished by his captain and being a loyal brother, Lin Feng chose the latter and called Bojo. "Hello, Little Spade. Don't say I'm not loyal, there is a bright path for you to sleep with Captain again. It depends on your courage. Lin Feng crossed his legs as he spoke. Captain is drunk. His coordinates are at the bar next to a university. He's getting someone to pick him up. Do you want to go? Bo Jiu didn't hesitate. Her reply made Lin Feng mutter, aren't you afraid of death? Only you would dare to target Captain. I'm near a university, it's convenient to head over. I'll take a cab now. She added, in the future, if you wish to sleep with Almighty Yun, I'll help you. Lin Feng roared in his heart. I'm a straight guy, I don't want to sleep with my own brothers. Unfortunately, the phone had already been hung up. Chapter 964. After Bo Jiu hung up, she hopped into a cab. Sir, the White Knight bar near a university. At this hour, the traffic was starting to get congested. The cab wasn't going fast. She didn't understand why the Almighty would call Lin Feng, but only a naive person like Lin Feng would ask her to fetch the Almighty. When Bo Jiu alighted, she was prepared for the Almighty's cold stare. After leaving the club, the Almighty went straight to the bar, clearly in a bad mood. He had been like this when he had been young. When he was unhappy, he would reject others. No matter how she tried to coax him, he wouldn't budge. What a troublesome little vixen. Back then, she had been thick-skinned. But from the looks of it, she wasn't that thick-skinned. Bo Jiu glanced down at the time on her watch before walking briskly towards the bar. She bypassed the car parked in front of the door and saw a cold figure standing under the neon lights. It was a very noble and different person. Bo Jiu prepared herself mentally. Basically, she was prepared to be rejected. She took another step forward. At this moment, she saw him clearly. The Almighty's battle uniform was half open, revealing the white t-shirt underneath. His short black hair and tall nose showed off his beautiful side profile. His facial features were clear, and his eyebrows were clear and his eyes were clear. He held a cigarette between his slender and fair fingers. Because he had drunk some alcohol, his fringe drooped down, reflecting his deep eyes, making him look even more wanton and unrestrained. The Almighty raised his eyes and glanced at her. It was obvious that he had already sensed her presence. Bo Jiu could hear her heartbeat. She thought of many things she wanted to say, but when she saw the person behind the Almighty, she paused. It was a short-haired girl with a sweet appearance. She seemed to have been standing there for a while, a bright smile on her face. She seemed to be talking to the Almighty. She could vaguely hear the word senior. This was. Bo Jiu paused. She wasn't sure how the girl had come. Was she drinking with the Almighty? Bo Jiu couldn't be blamed for thinking that way. She had never seen anyone so close to the Almighty. Even though they hadn't had any physical contact, there was an indescribable feeling. But there was an indescribable feeling. It seemed like they knew each other. Based on her understanding of the Almighty, if he really hated someone, he would definitely ask the other party to leave. Did the Almighty come alone or did he have a date? Bo Jiu wasn't sure if she should continue walking over. At this moment, the girl also raised her eyes. At first, she was surprised that Gu Shijiu would appear. Then, she smiled, revealing her dimples. Senior, that's Spade Z, right? He's even more handsome in real life. Qin Mo remained silent. Bo Jiu suddenly felt that her presence was unnecessary. Her heart sank and she was about to turn. How long do you want me to stand here alone? He asked in a low and familiar voice. Bo Jiu glanced up. She wasn't sure if he was talking to her. Besides, he didn't seem happy that she was here. The man stubbed out the cigarette in his hand and threw it into the dustbin. He pulled open his uniform jacket and walked towards her. She didn't even have the time to react before he walked towards her. Her vision darkened as someone covered her with a jacket. Bo Jiu was about to move. But the voice beside her ears was still cold. Don't move, I don't want to see you now. Bo Jio's fingers stilled. She didn't know what to do. As expected, it wasn't a good feeling to be hated by the Almighty. She was so handsome that even the Almighty didn't want to see her face. In the future, she wouldn't be able to use this face to win any benefits. Since when did her face become a minus factor? Bo Jio took a moment. It was too difficult for her to stay still. Just as she was about to take a step, she saw the person walking towards her from under the jacket. Before she could do anything, she felt herself being picked up by someone. This. Didn't he not want to see her? Why, Brother Mo. He ignored her, but she could feel his familiar peppermint tobacco scent lingering at the tip of her nose. Bo Jio didn't move. The tip of her nose touched Qin Mo's chest through the jacket. She couldn't see anything as he carried her. Her fingers tightened on the jacket, her heart racing. She didn't understand what the Almighty meant. Was he really going to throw her into the dustbin? After all, the Almighty had been looking at her with disdain, as though he wanted to get rid of her. Speaking of which, why wasn't the Almighty surprised that she was the one who came to fetch him and not the naive Lin Feng? Just as Bo Jio was thinking about it, she felt herself being placed on the seat of a car. It was probably the Land Rover she was familiar with. Because of the surrounding environment, even if she couldn't see it in front of her, she knew that the furnishings around her were familiar to her. Just as she was about to say something, her chin was lifted. After the jacket was slightly lifted, a cold kiss came in. Bo Jio's pupils wavered. Her lips were pried open. All she could feel was the aroma of the wine pouring in, and the tipsy feeling made her lose all her thoughts at that moment. The tip of their tongues touched, bringing with it a scent that she hadn't felt for a long time. Bo Jio could only lean against the seat, unaware of the situation around her. Half her face was covered by the jacket and she was in a sorry state from the kiss. The Land Rover was parked in the parking lot marked out by the bar. There were many people passing by. Qin Mo was wearing a white t-shirt, bending over and kissing. Who knew how many people stopped in their direction? That kind of scene seemed to only appear in comics. But no matter how curious they were, they didn't know what the youngster looked like. How exactly did he think of such a way of kissing? They could vaguely see the figure but not the face. But just by looking at the figure, they were definitely good-looking, especially Qin Mo's long legs and waist. His half-bent waist exuded an innate aura. Even his kiss was domineering. Those who whistled and those who tossed and turned did it. Qin Mo acted as though there was no one else around, kissing her until she was exhausted. After a while, he released her and pinched her chin again. He bit her lips, continuing to taste the sweetness that she didn't want to let go of. Bo Jio didn't know what was going on around her, allowing Qin Mo to kiss her. Gradually, she lost all her strength. The sounds seemed to have weakened. No matter how loud they became the background in her ears. It was as though there was such a person in this world. When he kissed you, you could only hear your own heartbeat. Everyone saw the kissing scene. Fan Jia, who was standing not far away, saw the entire scene. Her fingers tightened, and when it reached a certain level, her eyes overflowed with venom. She really didn't expect that after planning for such a long time, a chance to drink alone with him, it would be gone just like that. And why was Qin Mo still in such a state after Spade Z saved Hoshino? She had received news that the two of them were in a cold war. And why was he starting to like boys? That person clearly liked girls. She had always thought it was because of the novelty. The novelty was the excitement that the youngster brought him. Because in the esports scene, he probably hadn't met such a person. The FC King of Zone C, it was hard not to notice this title. She had seen young Master Fu play before, it was no wonder he was interested. Fan Jia had always known that other than Z, Qin Mo was most interested in esports. In the past, she had tried to get close to him, but it hadn't been effective. This young master of the Fu family had only occupied that position because he had appeared in the most vacant period of his life. He was really lucky. Fan Jia stood there, her gaze deepening. Watching him kiss someone made her want to kill the person he was kissing. It seemed like she hadn't been forceful enough. Fan Jia's gaze deepened, but she didn't show any emotions. It was time to find an alliance. Fu Zhongyi was the best candidate. Amidst the envious whistles, Fang Jia disappeared into the night. She believed that as long as she continued to lay low, she would be able to obtain that person completely. She would let young Master Fu have him for a few days, she would snatch him back. Because she knew better than anyone what could attract his interest, in the Land Rover. Bojiu sat there, watching the pair of eyes that were as beautiful as the stars, panting softly. She didn't know how she had offended the Almighty. His coat covered him again, and his whole body was covered. Through the jacket, the Almighty's lips pressed against her, the fragrance of sandalwood lingering in her bones. His voice was still cold. Who asked you to appear? He didn't want her to show her face. Bojiu wanted to lift her lids, but her head was already pressed into his embrace. Then she heard the Almighty on the phone. Drive over. There was a driver? Then why did he get Lin Feng to fetch him? It seemed like the Almighty had drunk too much. Bojiu arched a brow, feeling as though the Almighty was looking in her direction. But she couldn't tell what he was thinking. Actually, his thoughts were simple. The moment he saw that person's face, he would lose his principles. Hence, he didn't want to see it. But because of that person in his arms, many feelings changed. The pressure on his chest disappeared without a trace. Even if he didn't see it, he could imagine her gloomy expression. He would leave her alone. That way, he wouldn't be able to see through her thoughts. Qin Mo's gaze deepened at the thought of her instinctive protection. After all, she was the most obedient when she was gloomy. Bojiu couldn't see any of this, which was indeed gloomy. She couldn't see anything. She tilted her head and heard the sound of the car. After walking for a while, she asked, Brother Mo, when can I show my face? Chapter 965. But Bojiu knew it was a light punishment. She sat there for a while. When she felt it was enough, she tried to suggest, Brother Mo, I think you'll feel better when you see my face. I'm so handsome, I can beautify the air. I don't need you to beautify the air. His voice was slow, his fingers touching her lips through the jacket. You better be quiet, I don't want to see your face or hear your words, understand? Understood, who couldn't be at Sunder a little fairy? Bojiu nodded, not saying it out loud. She knew the Almighty didn't want to reconcile with her this time. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror more than once. Boss Qin could just ask someone to leave if he didn't want to see them. Why did he have to cover his face? He turned and planted a kiss on the top of her head. He didn't understand the boss's world. Perhaps no one could understand. He liked someone too much and was a proud person. If it had been someone else, he would have ignored them. But this fellow, he forced himself not to think about it but used Lin Feng to make her appear. Yes, Qin Mo's phone call wasn't something he would make when he was drunk. As the captain of the Supreme Alliance, he knew every member's personality. When that naive Lin Feng received the call, his first reaction would definitely be to inform this fellow. Qin Mo glanced down at the youngster in his arms. He was still thinking about what he should do with her. Since he couldn't think of anything, he decided to bring her home. The Land Rover entered the military courtyard. Bojiu's hearing was sensitive, she could hear the sound of the gun. The car stopped. Qin Mo carried the person he had covered with his jacket down and placed her on the bed. Bojiu took a moment. The moment she reached her hand out, her lips were kissed again. This time, the kiss was deeper. When her head sank into the pillow, her breathing became erratic. Our relationship isn't just in bed, understand? That hoarse voice, accompanied by his breath, landed on her lips. It was still a little cold. You have to take responsibility for provoking me. Bojiu muttered, I've always been responsible. Your responsibility is to save Hoshino. Qin Mo's voice was calm. Bojiu didn't know how to reply. Chin Mo glanced at her, released her, and stood up. Bojo knew this was the end. She couldn't make up any more stories. Chin Mo's back was facing her as he replied, "Forget it." Bojo's fingers froze. She wanted to say something but it wasn't possible. There was the sound of the door closing. It was obvious that he wanted to chase the guest away. Even though she knew that, she didn't want to move. He maintained this position for a while. It was as if it was absorbing the last bit of sunlight. The night outside began to turn dark. Chin Mo sat in the study room that was just a wall away from his bedroom. Listening to the commotion, he tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He held the silver cigarette lighter in his hand, and when he flipped it over, he saw that it was a USB flash drive. If not for Lin Feng's call, she probably didn't even think to ask where he was. Things that were forced would always be very painful to prick. Even the gifts were the same. There was a moment of silence. Chin Mo knew she was about to leave. He smoked a cigarette, as if that was the only way to suppress the boredom. Just as he turned his head, the study room door was pried open. The person who pried open the door stood there. "I'll leave after I help you apply the ointment." Chin Mo extinguished the cigarette, his voice calm. "Someone will be here in a while." Her only excuse to stay was gone. Bojo finally understood that the Almighty didn't want to see her. They had never been so polite with each other. Until a sound from downstairs broke the silence. Movie Queenan was back. She walked over when she saw the light in the study room. With just one look, she could see the problem between them. Just as Bojo was about to leave, he grabbed her. "Jo, since you're here, I have something to ask for your opinion. Don't leave today, let's have a good talk." Bojo glanced at Chin Mo, replying, "All right." Chin Mo's clenched fists loosened as the word left his lips. Since they were going to stay, they definitely had to eat dinner. Movie Queenan had already decided to arrange for them to sit together. But that was all in the future. Movie Queenan was smart. She never asked the children what had happened. She did have something to look for Bojo. "I have a movie, the director has asked me twice to be his lobbyist." Movie Queenan added a piece of bacon. "I think the role is suitable for you. Why don't you take on the role and I'll tell you about the weakness of my cold son." Bojo never knew how to reject someone like Movie Queenan. "I have to wait until after the competition, but I'm not sure what the situation will be. Besides, I don't know how to act." Once the competition ended, she would find an opportunity to leave. "It doesn't matter." Movie Queenan reached out to pinch the youngster's face. "You don't have to act. The director said you can just sit in front of the computer and play games. You can appear as yourself. That's all, just treat it as a favor." Since Movie Queenan said that, Bojo couldn't reject her. "The director is looking for any sports player?" "No, it's a hacker." Movie Queenan was delighted. "In the movie, it's my son. I've always wanted a handsome and caring son like Joe. Your brother Mo is too cold, not cute at all." It wasn't easy to reply. Bojo lowered her head and ate the rice in her bowl. She couldn't help glancing at the empty seat beside her. Deep down, she knew why the Almighty hadn't come down to eat. It was because of her. Chapter 966. The moment Movie Queenan finished her sentence, Bojo's phone rang in her pocket. The unique ringtone made her pause. She whipped her phone out. The caller ID wasn't displayed, but the string of numbers was extremely familiar to her. Besides, she knew that Hoshino wouldn't have called her if it wasn't something serious. Bojo turned to Movie Queenan. "Apologies, I have to take a call." Then she stood up. When she reached the entrance, her entire aura changed, especially her eyes, which seemed to be covered with a layer of light. It made her look like a devil in the night, dangerous and mysterious. "Hello." Something happened to Rao Rong. Hoshino swiped the screen. Everyone in the esports industry is saying that there's something fishy about your match. Fishy? Bojo arched a brow. Hoshino replied, someone said that Rao Rong didn't go all out in the match and lost intentionally because someone placed a bet on the match. If Supreme Alliance won, the other party would earn a lot. That isn't all, the crime squad has taken Rao Rong away, claiming that there is evidence pointing towards Rao Rong being the mastermind behind the maiden sacrifice. The organization wants to push Rao Rong out to divert everyone's attention. Bojo's gaze deepened. The son of a hero shouldn't be treated this way. Rao Rong worked harder than anyone else in that match. If it wasn't for him, the other party would have lost badly. Hoshino broke into a warm smile. Shall we take action? Bojo glanced at the sky. Let's meet outside the police station. It seems like you've already thought of a way to slap them in the face. Hoshino hooked the keys on the table. I'll prepare the costumes and props, which one do you need? Bojo took a moment. A wooden guitar, a white t-shirt, a black trench coat, a mask, hair dye, and a motorcycle, something cool. What are you going to do? Hoshino glanced down at the information in his hands. You're going to use a guitar? Bojo lifted her lips, a hint of devilishness in her eyes. Since I'm returning, I need the audience to prove it. If not, I won't be able to answer to their efforts in impersonating me. You're breaking the rules again. Hoshino's eyes lit up brightly, as though he had been in a daze for a long time. I understand, I'll see you in a bit. See you in a bit. Bojo hung up and turned towards Movie Queenan, who was watching her. She felt slightly embarrassed. She wanted to see the Almighty again, but time was tight and he might not want to see her. Bojo knew that the Almighty was still angry and it would be best if she could stay. But compared to that, she had more important matters to attend to. Antian, I have something urgent to attend to, I have to leave. Movie Queenan could tell from Bojo's expression that the youngster had something urgent to attend to. At her age, she was able to see the bigger picture. All right, you can go ahead. It's time to make my cold son anxious. Otherwise, he will never understand that sincerity is the most important thing in a relationship. Brother Mo is great. It's my fault, I wasn't sincere enough. Movie Queenan watched the youngster's serious expression and couldn't help breaking into a smile. Who would take the blame? Her cold son must have accumulated good fortune in his previous life to have met such a sensible child like Joe. Movie Queenan glanced at the youngster's serious face and couldn't help but laugh. Who would take the blame? Her cold son must have accumulated good fortune in his previous life to have met such a sensible child like Joe. Movie Queenan chuckled. Joe, you'll be at a disadvantage. If he dares to bully you in the future, tell me. I'll be on your side. Movie Queenan chuckled. Joe, you're at a disadvantage. If he dares to bully you in the future, tell me. I'll be on your side. Movie Queenan chuckled. Joe, you'll be at a disadvantage. If he dares to bully you in the future, tell me. I'll be on your side. It had been the same when she had been young. On the surface, she seemed to be at a disadvantage. But in reality, every time something happened, he would be the one shielding her. A family like Madame Anne's had high standards for upbringing. Grandpa Anne was even more so, he had raised the Almighty like a prince. He played the piano well and knew how to play chess. While she had been wandering outside like a clay figurine, the Almighty had come to meet the foreign guests in his little suit. The Anne family's house was right next to theirs. Even though it was the same villa, the Anne family's house was clean. Every time she climbed over the wall and knocked over a flower pot, Grandpa Anne would ask and the Almighty would say that he had accidentally knocked it over. There had been one time when she had opened the Anne family's safe. The Almighty had taken the blame for her. He had been punished by Grandpa Anne to stand for a long time. If it had been the Almighty, he would never have made such a mistake. In his eyes, such mistakes were childish. He had never been punished by Grandpa, and Bojo could still remember the way her little puppy had stood in the middle of the living room. He hadn't been impatient at all. But he hadn't been happy at that time. When he had tugged her hand over, his expression had been cold. Little Bojo, are you an idiot? Bring the medicine box over. Bring me the first aid kit. If I find any blood on your hands on my sheets, I'll throw you out the window. Bojo was used to such threats. She didn't think much of it. Besides, the Almighty had been the one who had bandaged her hand. He probably didn't mind it being dirty. That day, she had hugged her little puppy and slept soundly. Before he had fallen asleep, he had muttered in her ear, "You're so stupid. I guess the safe has to be changed." From that day onwards, all the locks in the family's house had been changed to electronic. Back then, Bojo had told herself that she would take good care of her little puppy. That was probably the reason why Bojo didn't want to receive that person's hateful gaze one day. Movie Queen watched as the youngster lowered her gaze. She reached out to push Bojo, a faint smile on her face. She had the demeanor of a mature queen. "All right, you can go now. I'll talk to Brother Mo." Bojo didn't have time to stay any longer. But it was good that she had left. The Almighty would probably come down for dinner after she left. After leaving the military courtyard, Bojo glanced at the time on her phone. Then she hopped into a taxi. As the city lights lit up, the night came to everyone's side. The nightlife in the city center started to get lively. There would always be many people near the commercial plaza. The most eye-catching advertising screens hung on the skyscrapers. Everything was a show of life. In the study room on the second floor of the Chin family's house. Chapter 967. The computer screen lit up, a familiar sound reverberating in the study room. It was the sound of a player entering the game. It could be said that this was the first special effect used in the video. As the video unfolded like a story, the game characters appeared. Chin Mo looked at the two familiar IDs, his eyes widening in shock. This was, before that guy had joined Supreme Alliance, when they had cleared a dungeon together? No. That wasn't right. Chin Mo looked at the video, his game character and the youngster's game character dashing towards the other party's wilderness like two gusts of wind. This wasn't just a video of them clearing the instance. It was all the video clips of the two of them fighting side by side. From the moment they first met to the current National League, every scene was presented in this manner by her. Of course, Chin Mo knew how much time and effort it took to edit these videos. Moreover, some scenes had to be searched. He had originally thought that this was the end. But it wasn't. At the end of the video was the photo they had posted on their official Weibo. A line of words appeared on it. "I hope to have someone like you, like the cool breeze in the mountains, like the warm light in the ancient city, from morning to night, from the wilderness to the canyon. As long as it's you, it's all good." Chin Mo didn't head down because he had seen this video clip. It wasn't long, only around 7 to 8 minutes, but it was hard to believe that it was during normal times. But when he saw the last sentence, Chin Mo forgot to move, he just stared at the computer screen. For the first time, he felt that even if it was out of his control, it wasn't a bad thing. His heart seemed to be struck by something. He couldn't help but stand up and walk down the stairs, his eyes scanning the surroundings as though he was looking for someone. There wasn't anyone on the sofa, at the dining table, or even in the kitchen. Chin Mo wanted to search the other side. Movie Queen walked over and stopped him. "You don't have to look, he has left." Chin Mo's fingers paused, his brows furrowing. "Left? It should be something urgent, you." Before Movie Queen could finish her sentence, her well-mannered son grabbed his jacket from the sofa and walked out the door without turning back. He was still fuming. It was rare for Movie Queen to be so impatient. She strode over. "Son, don't blame me for not reminding you." Joe seemed to have received a call from a friend. "It seems like that friend treats Joe pretty well. You have to understand that there are many people who have feelings for Joe." If you continue to be so cold, you might really lose Joe. It's better to have a sense of crisis in a relationship. Even without his mother's reminder, Chin Mo already knew. Otherwise, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Chin Mo could get whatever he wanted and had the dominant position in this relationship. But in reality, if anything happened, she would be the one who could leave easily. However, it was enough. After Chin Mo saw the video, he told himself that since she didn't want to say something, there was no need to say it. Including Hoshino. All he wanted to do now was find that girl, take her in his arms, and tell her that she belonged to him. Chapter 968. In the early summer, every city had its own way of life. Northerners liked to drink beer with spicy crayfish and meat skewers. Southerners rarely ate spicy food, but they would go shopping with a few girlfriends. Although these were different, there were still similarities. There would be many people gathered in the commercial square of every city. It was even more so in a metropolis like Zhangcheng. The big screen hanging on the building was very high visibility. Not only the people standing there, but even the cars going back and forth could see clearly what was on it. Under normal circumstances, it would be the advertisements of various celebrities. At around 7 p.m., the sky was not dark yet. This was the time when Zhangcheng was the most congested. In the middle of the bustling street, located in the commercial city center, was a landmark of China. Cars that came here would have to wait for a period of time even if they were unwilling. Everyone knew the reason. It was too risky. The commercial square had a wide range of activities. There were coffee shops like Starbucks, Burger King, etc. There was also a small fountain in the middle. Many people were walking back and forth. There were young people chatting, old people with children, and even a group of cool high school students playing skateboards. At this time, a pure black tomahawk, like a beautiful wild leopard, stopped in front of the fountain with a swoosh, and a handsome tail swing attracted almost everyone's attention. In front of everyone was a tall and straight young man. His long legs supported himself by the side of the motorcycle. Then, he got off the motorcycle nimbly and took off his helmet, revealing a pair of deep peach blossom eyes. The young man was wearing a black mask, so people couldn't see his face clearly. Even so, just looking at his figure made people's hearts beat faster. So handsome. This was the exclamation of the girls. The guy at the side raised his eyebrows. That car is really handsome. It was a limited edition. How much did it cost? I'm talking about the person. As the girl said that, she turned back to look at the young man who brushed past her. She mumbled, "He's really handsome. He's holding a guitar. Is he going to sing? I want to stay and listen. Why didn't he take off his mask? I want to see how handsome he is. He definitely didn't take it off because he doesn't look handsome wearing it. That's fine too. Leave some room for imagination. What song do you guys think he will sing? That's hard to say. It's coming." The onlookers were all very enthusiastic. After all, the sight of such a handsome young man with his face turned to the side and tuning his guitar was enough to make people stop. Not to mention the equipment the young man had brought. Instead of the usual microphone, he wore something that looked like a headset on his ear. The crooked part was a small microphone. Needless to say, the youngster looked even more handsome with the equipment. Then, the young man smiled at the girls who were looking at him. A series of exclamations could be heard. "I can't take it anymore. It's so cool." The young man lowered his head, took out some wires, and inserted them into a small notebook. Just when countless people thought that the youngster was playing a small sound system to make it easier for him to choose the music, the computer screen had actually been split into two parts. This was because the USB drive that was plugged into it had already determined that this was a network intrusion. As for where the intruder was, Bo Jio glanced over, a smile on her face. Her silver short hair was now black and stuck to her left ear. The diamond earring reflected the lights, glinting like a black gem. His slender fingers moved up and down on the keyboard. His hand speed was so fast that no one saw the codes that appeared one after another on the screen and the dialogue boxes that kept popping up. It wasn't difficult for her to hack into a commercial plaza since there was a public network here. There were countless people using the wife account. It was easy to create a loophole in the system. In a short 30 seconds, Bojio had broken through the firewall of the shopping mall. From the surveillance room, she controlled the broadcasting rights of the entire plaza. At the same time, she set up many virtual IPs. Bojio wasn't worried that the police would lock onto her. The logic was simple. Anyone in the commercial plaza would be holding onto an electronic product. Regardless of whether it was a phone or a laptop, it would become the originating IP. But she still had to speed up. She was most afraid of going up against the Almighty. Fortunately, Smith was in charge of the crime squad. It's time to greet an old friend. Bojio smiled faintly. She pressed the enter button and hid the dialogue box. She hugged her guitar and straightened her body. This time, Bojio was back to Z's style. She wanted to tell the police that she was here and that they could catch her if they had the ability. Shall we start? The girls couldn't wait any longer. Bojio tilted her head, making the final adjustments. Her voice rang out. Hey, MMH, sound test. He's so cute. You call him cute no matter what he does. It's just a sound test. Are you jealous? You should grow up like him. I'm your boyfriend, not him. What's there to be jealous about? Even though that was what she said, the jealousy in her voice could be heard. The girl smiled sweetly at the side. As more and more people crowded over, Bojio finally lifted her lids. When she looked at them, her clear voice rang out slowly. Use your good morning to accompany me for dinner. Remember to save your thoughts in the piggy bank. I look at the twinkling stars in the sky. I hear the cowherd telling the weaver girl to be brave. When the voice rang out, everyone's eyes lit up. Even through the mask, the charm of the youngster's voice couldn't be suppressed. But, what song is that? It's so good, I've never heard it before. Is the generation gap here? Come over, let your boyfriend explain it to you. You were still in primary school when the song was released. Go, don't disturb me. Perhaps it was because the youngster's eyes were too beautiful, or perhaps it was because of the gentleness in her clear voice. More and more people stopped. Bojio sang softly, her lips curving up. Aren't you afraid that we are on opposite ends of the earth, watching your greeting? Riding a magic carpet, flying at the speed of light to me. You let me see the North Star and the Cross Star as a companion, without my arm as a pillow. Are you used to it? Your telescope can't see the loneliness of my northern hemisphere. The Pacific Ocean's tides follow the earth back and forth. I'll wait patiently, waiting for the day you reach the shore. When she reached the word shore, she turned and glanced at Hoshino, who was smiling faintly at her. Both of them were wearing masks, but they exuded different auras. If the young man was cool to the point of being devilish, then Hoshino, who was standing quietly in the crowd, was like spring water flowing in the mountains, like a prince. With their chemistry, they just needed a look to start the operation. In that instant, Hoshino broke into a smile, glancing up. There was a loud swoosh. The big screen that was originally playing the advertisements suddenly changed, and a big Z appeared. No, it wasn't just the various screens in the commercial plaza. It was also the same word that appeared on the phones of the people walking in the crowd. Some people who had watched sci-fi blockbusters immediately thought that it was a hacker attack. The entire commercial plaza was in an uproar. Everyone was fiddling with their phones, but the screen was frozen, not moving at all. At this moment, a manipulated voice appeared on the various screens in the plaza. Before I introduce myself, I have to greet my old friend. Smith, I heard that you came all the way from the Fifth Avenue to China just to catch me. TSK, the more you suffer, the braver you become. Even after so many failures, you still refuse to give up. But I'm really annoyed that you mistook me for someone else. The moment this sentence came out, it immediately attracted the attention of the police. The commercial plaza immediately took measures to remove the network intrusion. But when they sat at the service counter, they realized that the computers were no longer under their control. The network attack this time was too sudden, but it didn't affect the normal operations of the shopping mall. It only occupied the screen. But even so, the people in charge of the shopping mall expressed that they had never encountered such a situation before. Usually, large shopping malls like this would have police cars parked nearby. The patrolling policeman reacted quickly, informing the station at the first instance. It could be said that the local police station was busy to a new height that day. Such a case was too unique and had a negative impact. They couldn't handle it properly, so they could only report it to the higher-ups. At that time, Smith was sitting in the interrogation room, looking at Rao Rong opposite him. He arched a brow. "I finally caught you, Z." Rao Rong didn't speak, his hands cuffed. His brows were the same as before, but the corners of his lips curled up, revealing traces of mockery and sorrow. The arrest came very suddenly, and the accusations were overwhelming. Honestly speaking, he didn't mind going in. If his father could be vindicated, he was willing to do anything. But the moment the crime squad charged into the club, he clearly saw that person's gaze had dimmed. He was probably disappointed. Be it him or his team members. Rao Rong lowered his lids, glancing at his cuffed hands. Who knew that he used to really love esports? "Why aren't you speaking, Z?" Smith chuckled, looking confident. "You don't have to think of an excuse to escape. China isn't like the Fifth Avenue, you can't escape even if you want to." While Smith was speaking, Lin Shentao and his team members were being interrogated beside Rao Rong. "Regarding Rao Rong, I would like Mr. Lin to provide us with some evidence," the interrogator said politely. Lin Shentao hadn't said a word since he entered. As the most powerful witness, they had to pry his mouth open. But his demeanor made it difficult for them to get any information out of him. He was good-looking and talkative, but at this moment, Lin Shentao was more silent than anyone else. "Mr. Lin." The interrogator was about to take the gentle route. Lin Shentao suddenly spoke, his voice low. "Do you know that person?" "What?" The interrogator couldn't react. Lin Shentao glanced up, his eyes bloodshot. "Rao Rong, what kind of person is he?" The interrogator remained silent, glancing at one another. Lin Shentao didn't seem to care what others thought of him. "When I first joined the team, I was always at the bottom. My hand speed wasn't fast enough and I couldn't keep up with my tactics. Many rookies weren't willing to team up with me, feeling that I was a burden. They blocked me in the changing room and forced me to leave the team. It was the captain who stood in front of me, telling me that talent was important but hard work was more important. He told them not to form small groups and ostracize other members. For the sake of the team's victory, he would stay up until 1 in the morning to study the best strategies of each member. He would often lie in front of the computer, revealing the brightest smile for every victory. When he lost, he would tell us that it didn't matter, we could try again next year. How could such a person purposely lose the National League for money? Back then, when the relationship between the team and the club was at its most tense, he took the risk of being frozen by the club to speak up for us. Many companies tried to poach him but he didn't leave because of us dragging him down. Do you know what the older members repaid him with? They forced him to leave the team, causing him to waste 2 years in esports. The club kept sending in useless relatives. If it wasn't for the captain, we would have died horribly against Supreme Alliance. The interrogator paused. "Mr. Lin, I know you have a good relationship with Rao Rong, but this isn't the time to be emotional. If you can provide us with evidence, we will be able to get to the bottom of the case." "I don't have any evidence." Lin Shentao's gaze was resolute. "Because I don't believe Captain is that kind of person." The interrogator knew he wouldn't be able to get any results even if he continued, hence, he left the room. He shook his head at Director Huang. It's too difficult. Any progress on Smith's side? Director Huang's heart sank after listening to Lin Chintao's words. Perhaps it was because of these experiences that Rao Rong had changed, just like his father. Ever since Rao Rong came in, he only said one thing, which was that he was the one who did it. He didn't say anything else. Does that mean he confessed? Yes, it had been a smooth interrogation, but because of that, Director Huang wanted to ask more questions. But Rao Rong's attitude. Director Huang sighed. The person beside him reminded, the higher-ups want to close the case as soon as possible. The maiden's sacrifice has caused a huge impact. The media has heard that the culprit has been caught and are still waiting for the verdict. Director Huang paced back and forth, glancing at the time on his watch. Call for a press conference. Yes. Chapter 969. Director Huang lowered his gaze. When he saw the live stream, his eyes widened in shock. He snatched the phone over, a single word flashing in his eyes, Z. Smith was still looking at Rao Rong, trying to dig something out when the interrogation room door was slammed open. I think you should take a look at this. It was Director Huang. Smith frowned, his body stiffening as he bolted upright. That's impossible. The Real Z is in the city center, the IP address is in the plaza. Director Huang's reaction was much calmer than Smith's. We have to take action immediately. Smith listened to the voice in the video, the veins on his forehead popping when he heard the word TSK. It's really him. D**M it. That's why we caught the wrong person. Director Huang glanced at Rao Rong, turning towards the crime squad members who were still looking at their phones. Stop looking, hurry up and inform the professionals to lock onto Z's location. Yes. The crime squad had never been in such a mess, everyone was moving as fast as they could. Found him. Suddenly, there was news from the technician. Smith's eyes lit up, leaning over. Where is the exact location of the mall? Second floor. The moment the technician said that, he added, No, that's not right, it's the 6th floor, that's not right either, it's outdoors. Smith grabbed a handful of hair. Where exactly is it? The technician wore an earpiece, watching the screen filled with red dots, his voice trembling. That's impossible. How can there be so many IP addresses? It was harder than ascending to the heavens to identify Z among so many IPs. Smith clenched his fists. D**M it, he's using this again. Let me tell you, where I am, if you have the ability, come and find me. His arrogance was the reason why the Interpol couldn't stand him. He felt as though he was flaunting his intelligence in front of him. There were so many people in the plaza, which one was he? Director Huang panicked as well. The video was like a virus, spreading crazily on the internet. Now, there was only one person who had a solution. Director Huang whipped out his phone, dialing a familiar number. Hello, Qin Mo, the Real Z has appeared. Qin Mo received the call and was on his way to the Fu family's house. When he heard the last sentence, his fingers paused and his gaze deepened. It was like a vast ocean, making it hard to read his emotions. His handsome face was reflected in the car window. He didn't seem the least bit flustered by Z's appearance. It was as though in his heart, this day would come sooner or later. Qin Mo instructed the driver to turn around while speaking to Director Huang calmly. Give me a simple explanation of the current situation. The moment Director Huang heard that emotionless voice, he knew he was saved. He explained Z's appearance from start to finish. Chapter 970. Director Huang stilled, muttering, Why didn't I think of that? Qin Mo didn't listen to him. He continued, Arrange for all the police to head to the scene. Z isn't done with his task. Not done? Director Huang glared at him. What else is she trying to do? Our Jiang City's police force is going to be slapped in the face by her. Qin Mo glanced out of the car window, his gaze deep. You caught the wrong person, she is seeking justice for Rao Rong. Director Huang paused. It's our fault, but Rao Rong has admitted to the crime, I can't do anything about it. Send people to the scene. Qin Mo's tone remained the same. Move in plain clothes. Director Huang replied, all right. He then asked, what about you? Qin Mo glanced at the long queue of cars in front. I'm rushing over. That's good, we have to catch C. You don't know how passive I am after her actions, I still have to explain to the higher-ups, Before Director Huang could finish, Qin Mo hung up. Director Huang choked. Why did he feel that Qin Mo was still the same as before? He didn't like to hear Zi's bad points. In reality, Director Huang didn't know that he wasn't the one who felt passive. Instead, he was sitting in the dorm room, staring at her phone, her left hand clenching tightly around Fan Jia. Due to the commotion caused by the incident, the other roommates in the dormitory were also watching. After a girl saw the video, she couldn't help but sigh, I always feel that Z is very handsome. What's going on? Fan Jia lifted her head abruptly. The girl was taken aback by her stare. For some reason, she felt a chill run down her spine. What's wrong? Nothing. Fan Jia held onto her phone, a sweet smile on her face. I'm going out for some fresh air. After walking out of the room, Fan Jia's expression sank. Z was still alive? How was that possible? She hadn't seen Z's face. But she knew some information. At that time, they had clearly set up a plan to kill that person. Why was Z back? That wasn't all, she was in Jiang City. She was right beside them. D****. Fan Jia swung her arm, smashing her phone against the wall. Z, who exactly was it? It was destined to be a restless night. The Major Crimes Division mobilized all available vehicles. Just to encircle an international criminal. Regarding the maiden's sacrifice, you don't have any leads, but I can provide you with a few clues. Smith, my old friend, the mastermind is a girl, a student from a university. She isn't even 23 years old and has a sweet appearance. She can't be the Rao Rong you caught. I'll show you the evidence later. No, I'll show everyone the evidence. There was once an esports player who wanted to seek justice for his father after losing his father. He took many detours, but he had never let anyone down and wouldn't fight a meaningless competition for money. Why did he come out? He wanted to tell the female student who impersonated me that your hacking skills aren't up to par. When the people in the commercial square heard the last sentence, there was an uproar. Some of the police officers at the scene had already started to intervene. Chapter 971. Look! The audience surrounding the youngster suddenly pointed at the big screen behind the youngster when they heard the high-pitched singing. At this time, the content above had changed. Rao Rong's side profile appeared on the screen along with his father, a hero who wanted to report corruption but was silenced. The photo looked old because Rao Rong was obviously different back then, he was very young. Pieces of evidence were displayed in front of everyone through the video. It was like a 2-minute film. But this movie actually existed in real life. It included the scene where Rao Rong was chased out by the club, and after his return, he didn't hesitate to offend the club in order to replace the worst player the investor had arranged. And what Rao Rong had said at the end of the competition. At this moment, it wasn't just the people in the square watching the video, there were also Rong fans holding onto their phones, suddenly feeling like crying. They had liked this person for a long time. Those who had been with him till now all knew what kind of person he was. That person was the strongest sorcerer in the esports scene, one of the 3 pillars along with Almighty Shao and Almighty Qin. He wouldn't play an esports match that went against his own conscience for money. He wouldn't really lose his humanity. There was too much unfairness when it came to that person. It would indeed cause a person to be twisted. Perhaps it was because he had such a father. That was why he could survive in the cracks. But at the same time, someone had let down his youth. At his peak, his family had been ruined and he had been in such a state for over a year. He was someone who loved esports so much. Do you still remember the youngster who had stood in front of his teammates when he first debuted, wearing his uniform and smiling? That scene had been in the past for too long. For a long time, why didn't they see the almost extinguished light in that person's eyes when he appeared again? What exactly did he go through to become the complete opposite of what he had been in the past? He had been maliciously suspected, expelled by the club, betrayed by his teammates and robbed of his glory. However, even so, in the end, he hadn't done anything that went against his conscience. He had wanted to redress his father's grievances, going against the organization, but he hadn't executed the organization's orders. It was because he had told himself that he would only punish those who deserved to be punished and not the innocent. In the face of some pointed evidence, he couldn't deny it, because if he did, his father would be wronged for life. When everyone saw the final scene, not only the ordinary people, but even the members of the key case investigation unit who were still on duty stopped in their tracks, their eyes red. Rao Rong's father had brought them along. President Qin. Not far from the commercial square, a Land Rover was still queuing up to enter the parking lot. The driver looked at the screen in the distance and couldn't help but turn to look at his young master. Qin Mo's eyes were also on the words on the screen and the old photos. Then, he pushed open the car door, held the metal bar in front of him with one hand, and jumped over. His black trench coat drew an arc in the wind. The driver opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. After all, the young master's appearance just now was really handsome, very different from his usual self. Just as everyone was looking up at the big screen, Qin Mo walked into the crowd, holding his phone as he dialed Director Huang's number. There's no need to search inside, Z is outside. Director Huang, who had already entered the mall, was confused. Outside? How do you type on a computer outside? You have to ask Z, Qin Mo replied faintly. Qin Mo's voice was calm. The view isn't as good in the mall as it is outside. Also, we can see the police's movements from here. Get our men out and move quickly because Z is already wrapping things up. Director Huang widened his eyes. Wrapping things up? The video on the screen is still playing, how can it be wrapping things up? Z's network attack can be delayed. Qin Mo walked through the crowd, his eyes sweeping past the people that walked past him. Then, he headed towards the fountain. You can ask Smith about this. Director Huang pressed his throbbing head. Smith has already gone crazy. Is that so? Z slapped him in the face. This method is indeed maddening, the higher-ups should have taken action. Do you still have Rao Rong's father's file? I want to take a look. Qin Mo's gaze was as deep as the night, walking as though he was searching for someone. Director Huang fell into a rare silence. It's a little difficult, it has been more than a year and it will take some effort to present some evidence. But for his case, the difficulty lies in the fact that the person in charge of his sentence and the file management has already retired. Some of the information has also been lost, making it difficult to reconstruct the situation. Which means someone has tampered with the file. Qin Mo's voice sank. Then check who he wanted to report back then. The information has been lost and there must be an internal problem. At this point, Director Huang understood that the person they were looking for was most likely someone with a high position and authority. As for how high this person's authority was, Director Huang glanced up at the screen. To be able to bury a grievance for such a long time without even seeing the light of day, it had to be someone in charge. Director Huang's heart couldn't help but tremble. If it wasn't for Z's video, the grievance would never have been known. Z, the evil hacker, had chosen to use such a method to make a comeback. Was it to let everyone know the truth? Director Huang's body trembled. When he looked at the screen, his expression changed. This was Z's intention? In that moment, Director Huang seemed to understand why Qin Mo had never believed Z was the culprit from the start. Even if their modus operandi was very similar, even the way they acted was 90% similar. But in terms of intention, it was worlds apart. Z was using a hacker's method to do the same thing. To cry out for justice. To let the truth be known and to return justice to the victim. Even so, Director Huang didn't believe their path was the same. Because they had to consider more. That was right, someone like Z would become the ideal hero in everyone's heart. But to maintain peace, they had to rely on the strict policemen who were constantly on the move and didn't even have time to eat when they were busy. Against Z. Even Director Huang felt that it was a pity. But he still had to say that people with different beliefs couldn't make plans together. In the past, Qin Mo had deviated when it came to Z. Therefore, this sentence could not be more suitable to be used on these two people. Among all the criminals, Z was the only one who could earn Qin Mo's praise, no one else. But a criminal was a criminal after all. He believed that Qin Mo had a balance in his heart. And now, Z had appeared again. Even he didn't know how Qin Mo would deal with it. Outside the plaza, the crowd was surging. The video on the screen was still playing. Qin Mo suddenly paused, the corners of his eyes arching. Where was the singing coming from? He furrowed his brows for a moment, then followed the sound and quickly walked over. At this moment, the singing stopped. Qin Mo's eyes dimmed in that instant. At this moment, the youngster in the middle of the plaza removed her guitar from her neck, placing it behind her back. Bojio's actions were natural, just like a singer by the side of the street, packing her belongings and heading home after encountering trouble. She bent her long legs, closing the laptop on the ground. The speed was still running. There was a minute delay. To Bojio, a minute was enough. She turned, but didn't go to the motorcycle parked at the parking lot. Because she knew that if she rode the motorcycle now, it would be a signal to the police that she was there. She carried the guitar and walked into the crowd. Bojio was still wearing a black mask. Even though the police had moved from the inside to the outside of the mall, there were two policemen who brushed past her. They didn't notice that the person they were looking for had walked past them, heading towards the crowd. Bojio didn't walk quickly because most of the people around her were still immersed in the video. Their emotions and walking were heavy. At this moment, it wasn't a good thing to walk quickly. Some of the girls watched as the youngster, who had mesmerized them, walked with them, their hearts beating faster. They hadn't expected the youngster to walk in the same direction. They wanted to ask him where he was going and if it was on the way. Just as the girls' faces turned darker, the youngster suddenly glanced up. The young man suddenly looked up and saw a tall and straight figure standing in the crowd. It was as if he was a god waiting for a rabbit to come to him. Bojio's fingers stilled, her pupils trembling. She started to analyze the situation. There was still a distance to walk from here to there. But she couldn't just turn around and leave, because that would only make the Almighty notice her at first glance. Hence, she could only face him head-on. This situation was similar to the first time they had met at the Fifth Avenue. The difference was that Bojio already knew how formidable her opponent was. She had seen the Almighty, but he hadn't seen her. Even if he had seen her, she had disguised herself. But Bojio wasn't sure if her disguise would work in front of the Almighty. Bojio watched as the distance between them shortened. Her left hand, which was in her pocket, clenched tightly. 90 meters. 80 meters. 70 meters. 60 meters, Bojio counted the numbers in her mind. There were 2 times when the Almighty's gaze swept over her. Her heart didn't seem to belong to her, beating rapidly. She had to think of a way. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would be recognized. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.